What's worse than discovering your patient is a serial killer? Finding out they've been live streaming their therapy sessions to thousands of dark web viewers as entertainment before they commit murder. 6 weeks ago, I was a private counselor in Leeds, working with trauma victims and trying to build a sustainable practice. Now I'm hiding in a hotel, and tomorrow I'm supposed to testify about how my psychological assessments were used to select victims for Red Room broadcasts that my own patient has been orchestrating. I've been working as a trauma counselor for about 3 years since completing my psychology degree and clinical training. Private practice is challenging, irregular income, difficult cases, and the constant pressure of helping people through their darkest moments. But it's rewarding work when you can genuinely help someone recover from psychological trauma. The case that changed everything started 2 months ago when I was contacted by someone calling himself James Morrison. He explained that he was dealing with what he described as complex trauma related to witnessing violence, and he specifically requested sessions focused on understanding psychological responses to extreme situations. James presented as an articulate, professional man in his 30s who claimed to work in security consulting. He explained that his job occasionally exposed him to crime scenes and violent incidents, which had created what he called secondary trauma that was affecting his ability to function normally in social and professional situations. The symptoms James described were consistent with secondary trauma: difficulty sleeping, intrusive thoughts about violence, emotional detachment, and anxiety in social situations. He was particularly concerned about what he called inappropriate responses to witnessing or discussing violent events, which he felt were becoming more severe over time. James was an ideal private patient in many ways. He paid promptly, attended sessions regularly, and engaged actively with the therapeutic process. He was articulate about his experiences and seemed genuinely motivated to understand and address his psychological responses to trauma exposure. Our early sessions focused on standard trauma therapy approaches, helping James understand his reactions, developing coping strategies, and processing his experiences in a safe therapeutic environment. He responded well to treatment and seemed to be making genuine progress in managing his symptoms. About 3 weeks into our therapeutic relationship, James began asking more detailed questions about the psychology of extreme situations. He wanted to understand how people respond to life-threatening circumstances, what psychological factors influence behavior under extreme stress, and how trauma affects decision-making in crisis situations. These questions seemed reasonable given James's background in security consulting. Understanding psychological responses to extreme situations would be professionally relevant for someone who dealt with crime scenes and potentially dangerous circumstances. I provided information that I thought would help him understand his own reactions better. James also expressed interest in the psychology of perpetrators as well as victims. He explained that his security work sometimes required him to assess threats from potentially dangerous individuals, and he wanted to understand the psychological profiles that might indicate someone was likely to commit violence. The therapeutic discussions gradually became more focused on extreme psychology, the mindset of people who commit violence, the psychological factors that drive someone to harm others, and the mental processes that occur during violent encounters. James claimed this knowledge was essential for his security consulting work. Around this time, James began requesting that our sessions be recorded for his personal review. He explained that the psychological concepts we discussed were complex and that he wanted to be able to revisit our conversations to better understand and apply the therapeutic insights to his professional situations. The recording request seemed reasonable, and many patients find it helpful to review therapy sessions to reinforce learning and insights. I agreed to audio recording on the condition that the recordings were for James's personal use only and would not be shared with anyone else without explicit consent. James's progress in therapy was remarkable. He seemed to be developing sophisticated insights into trauma psychology and was able to discuss extremely disturbing scenarios with what appeared to be healthy emotional processing. I considered his case a therapeutic success story. About a month into treatment, James started bringing up hypothetical scenarios for discussion. He would describe complex, violent situations and ask me to analyze the psychological states of the people involved, both perpetrators and victims. He claimed these scenarios were based on cases from his security consulting work. The hypothetical scenarios became increasingly detailed and disturbing. James would describe specific methods of violence, particular types of victim selection, and elaborate psychological manipulation techniques. He always framed these as professional case studies that he needed to understand for security assessment purposes. I found myself providing detailed psychological analysis of extremely disturbing scenarios, explaining how victims might respond to different types of threat, what psychological factors might make someone more vulnerable to manipulation, and how perpetrators might exploit psychological weaknesses to control their targets. James was particularly interested in what he called authentic psychological responses versus performed reactions. He wanted to understand how to distinguish between genuine fear, pain, and desperation versus someone who might be acting or exaggerating their emotional state. These discussions felt increasingly uncomfortable, but James's professional background seemed to justify his need for this type of psychological insight. Security consulting would reasonably require understanding both victim and perpetrator psychology to assess and manage dangerous situations effectively. 2 weeks ago, everything changed when I discovered what James was really doing with our therapy sessions. While researching some of the specific scenarios he'd been discussing, I found references to identical situations being broadcast on dark web platforms as live entertainment. The hypothetical cases James had been asking me to analyze weren't security consulting scenarios. They were descriptions of actual torture and murder that was being streamed to paying audiences on Red Room platforms. My psychological analysis was being used to optimize these broadcasts for maximum viewer engagement. I realized that James wasn't seeking therapy for secondary trauma. He was gathering professional psychological insights to improve his systematic torture and murder operation. The recording of our sessions wasn't for personal review. It was content being broadcast to dark web audiences alongside the violent acts I'd been unknowingly helping to optimize. My therapeutic expertise was being exploited to create more authentic and psychologically sophisticated torture scenarios. The detailed discussions about victim psychology, trauma responses, and perpetrator mindset were being used to enhance the realism and impact of Red Room broadcasts. James had specifically sought out a trauma therapist because my professional knowledge could help him understand how to maximize psychological impact on his victims while creating more engaging content for his dark web audiences. The therapy sessions themselves had become part of the entertainment package. The recordings of our sessions were apparently being distributed to dark web users as educational content about victim psychology, helping other potential perpetrators understand how to create more authentic and disturbing scenarios. My professional insights were being commodified as instructional material for torture. When I confronted James about what I'd discovered, he calmly explained that trauma therapists were ideal sources of information about extreme psychology. My professional training and ethical commitment to confidentiality had made me a perfect unwitting consultant for his operation. James revealed that my psychological assessments and therapeutic insights had been used to select and prepare victims for his Red Room broadcasts. The detailed analysis I'd provided about vulnerability factors, trauma responses, and psychological manipulation techniques had helped him identify and target people who would provide the most authentic reactions. I managed to escape and contact the police, but the investigation has revealed the complexity of prosecuting crimes that exist primarily on the dark web. The broadcast James was involved in used sophisticated encryption and anonymous payment systems that make traditional law enforcement extremely difficult. More disturbing is learning that my therapeutic relationship with James was part of a larger network that specifically targets mental health professionals to gather psychological expertise for optimizing torture and murder broadcasts. Therapists, counselors, and psychologists are being systematically exploited for their professional knowledge. The police have moved me to protective custody while they investigate, but they have explained that cases involving dark web red rooms are notoriously difficult to prosecute successfully. The technology provides multiple layers of anonymity, while the evidence often exists in formats that are difficult to authenticate in court. James's operation has apparently relocated since my escape, but the investigation suggests it's part of an international network that uses psychological professionals to enhance the authenticity and impact of their dark web content. My case is just one example of how legitimate therapeutic relationships are being exploited. The most horrifying realization is that months of professional therapeutic work have been perverted into instructional content for systematic torture. My genuine attempts to help someone understand trauma psychology were being used to create more effective methods of inflicting psychological damage on innocent victims. I keep thinking about all the detailed psychological insights I provided during our sessions, information that is now being used to optimize torture scenarios for dark web entertainment. Professional knowledge that should help people recover from trauma is instead being used to create more sophisticated methods of inflicting it. The investigation has revealed that James's network was generating substantial revenue through their dark web operations, with subscribers paying premium rates for psychologically sophisticated torture content. My therapeutic expertise had become a valuable commodity in markets that consume authentic suffering as entertainment. The legal implications of my situation are complex. While I clearly had no knowledge of James's real activities, the detailed psychological information I provided could be characterized as facilitating his operation. My professional recordings and insights have become evidence in crimes I never knew I was helping to plan. I'm facing potential professional sanctions from psychology regulatory bodies, even though I was victimized rather than complicit. The therapeutic relationship that forms the foundation of psychological practice has been corrupted in ways that call into question my professional judgment and ethical awareness. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to meet with investigators who will determine how my therapeutic sessions were used to facilitate James's Red Room operation. But they've warned me that the psychological manipulation I experienced makes it difficult to determine where legitimate therapy ended and exploitation began. The most terrifying thought is that James's network is probably targeting other mental health professionals right now. How many therapists might be unknowingly providing psychological expertise that optimizes torture for dark web entertainment? How many therapeutic relationships might be covers for gathering professional knowledge about inflicting psychological damage? The mental health profession provides perfect access to detailed psychological knowledge about trauma, vulnerability, and human responses to extreme situations. Therapists are trained to maintain confidentiality, to engage with disturbing content professionally, and to provide detailed analysis of psychological states, all valuable capabilities for someone planning sophisticated torture. James's network understood exactly how to exploit the therapeutic relationship, presenting symptoms that would naturally lead to discussions about extreme psychology while recording everything for later use in planning and optimizing their dark web broadcasts. I never thought providing therapy could make me an unwitting consultant for systematic torture. I thought my professional knowledge was helping someone recover from trauma, not helping someone inflict more sophisticated trauma on innocent victims. Tomorrow's investigation will reveal how extensively my therapeutic insights were used to plan and execute Red Room broadcasts that generated entertainment for thousands of dark web viewers. But I already know that I'll never be able to practice therapy the same way again. The therapist becomes the unwitting optimization consultant for systematic torture, and there's no way to unknow how your professional expertise was really being used. And somewhere out there, James's network is probably scheduling appointments with other trauma therapists, looking for the next source of professional psychological knowledge to exploit for their dark web entertainment business. I spent years learning to help people recover from psychological trauma, only to discover that my expertise was being used to inflict more effective psychological trauma on others. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so horrifying. Have you ever placed someone in a job only to realize you've sent them to their death? 3 months ago, I was just a recruitment consultant in Bristol, trying to hit my quarterly targets and pay off my credit card debt. Now I'm sitting in a McDonald's at 2 in the morning, and tomorrow I have to explain to the police how my perfectly legitimate recruitment agency has been systematically sourcing victims for dark web Red Room broadcasts, while I earn commission on each successful placement. I work for Parker Recruitment Solutions, a mid-sized agency that specializes in temporary and contract placements across the Southwest. It's competitive work, long hours, difficult clients, and constant pressure to find candidates who match increasingly specific requirements. But when you land the right placement, the commission can be substantial. The client that changed everything first contacted us about 4 months ago. Morrison Holdings claimed to be an events management company looking for staff with specific psychological profiles for what they described as immersive entertainment experiences. They needed people who could handle high-stress situations, had minimal family connections, and were willing to work unusual hours for premium pay rates. Morrison Holdings was represented by a woman called Sarah Chen, who seemed professional and legitimate when she explained their staffing requirements. She said their company created specialized experiences for wealthy clients who paid premium rates for authentic, unscripted entertainment that required participants with particular personality traits. The psychological profiling requirements seemed unusual, but not unprecedented. Sarah explained that their entertainment experiences were intense and required participants who could maintain composure under pressure while providing authentic emotional responses. They needed people who were psychologically resilient, but emotionally expressive. Sarah was willing to pay substantial recruitment fees for successful placements, particularly for candidates who met their specific psychological criteria. She also offered performance bonuses based on how well-placed candidates performed in their roles, which created strong financial incentives for finding exactly the right people. The initial placements seemed successful. Candidates reported good working conditions, interesting projects, and pay rates that were significantly above market average. Morrison Holdings provided positive feedback about our recruitment quality and requested additional placements with similar psychological profiles. Over several weeks, Sarah began refining her requirements further. She needed candidates who were isolated, people with minimal social connections who wouldn't be missed immediately if they had to travel for extended assignments. She also wanted people with particular stress responses and specific emotional vulnerabilities. The psychological profiling became increasingly detailed. Sarah would request candidates who had experienced specific types of trauma, people with particular fears or phobias, individuals who displayed certain behavioral patterns under pressure. She claimed this was necessary for creating authentic experiences that met her clients' exacting standards. I found myself conducting psychological assessments that went far beyond normal recruitment practices. Detailed interviews about candidates' fears, trauma history, family relationships, and emotional responses to various scenarios. Sarah assured me this was standard practice for high-end entertainment recruitment. The commission structure Morrison Holdings offered was unlike anything I'd encountered. Base fees for successful placements, performance bonuses based on candidate suitability, and additional payments for candidates who met particularly specific psychological criteria. The money was too good to question the unusual requirements. Sarah also began requesting detailed documentation about placed candidates, psychological profiles, personal background information, family connections, and behavioral assessments. She claimed this information was necessary for matching candidates to appropriate projects and ensuring optimal performance in their roles. About 2 months into the arrangement, I started noticing concerning patterns. Candidates placed with Morrison Holdings would complete their initial assignments successfully, but then become difficult to contact. When I followed up on their performance, Sarah would explain that they'd been offered extended international assignments with enhanced confidentiality requirements. The extended assignments seemed to last indefinitely. Candidates would disappear from normal social media activity, stop responding to personal communications, and effectively vanish from their previous lives. Sarah always had reasonable explanations: overseas projects, confidentiality agreements, or career opportunities that required complete lifestyle changes. When I expressed concern about losing contact with placed candidates, Sarah assured me this was normal for their industry. High-end entertainment work often required participants to maintain complete confidentiality about projects and clients. Extended overseas assignments were common for people who proved successful in their roles. Sarah also began requesting candidates with increasingly specific vulnerabilities: people with particular financial pressures, individuals with limited family support, candidates who had expressed willingness to relocate or travel extensively for work. She claimed these factors made people more committed to challenging assignments. The psychological profiles Morrison Holdings required became more detailed and intrusive. Information about candidates' deepest fears, most traumatic experiences, and specific behavioral triggers. Sarah explained that creating authentic entertainment experiences required understanding how participants would respond to various psychological pressures. 6 weeks ago, everything changed when I discovered what Morrison Holdings actually did with the candidates I'd been placing. While researching one of their supposed entertainment projects, I found references to identical scenarios being broadcast on dark web platforms as live torture and murder. Morrison Holdings wasn't an entertainment company creating immersive experiences. They were operating red rooms that broadcast real torture and death to paying dark web audiences. The candidates I'd been recruiting weren't participants in elaborate role-playing scenarios. They were victims being systematically murdered for entertainment. The psychological profiling I'd been conducting wasn't for matching candidates to appropriate entertainment roles. It was for selecting victims who would provide authentic fear responses and genuine suffering that dark web audiences valued over obvious acting or staged content. My detailed psychological assessments had been used to identify people who would react authentically to torture, whose fears and vulnerabilities could be exploited for maximum viewer engagement, and whose disappearances wouldn't immediately trigger police investigations or media attention. The commission structure that seemed too good to be true was payment for sourcing victims for systematic murder. Every successful placement had resulted in someone's death, and I'd been earning money from each person I'd unknowingly sent to be tortured and killed for dark web entertainment. When I confronted Sarah about what I'd discovered, she calmly explained that recruitment consultants were ideal talent scouts for Red Room operations. We had access to detailed personal information, professional reasons for conducting psychological assessments, and legitimate business relationships that deflected suspicion from victim selection activities. Sarah revealed that my psychological profiles had been used not just for victim selection, but also for optimizing torture scenarios to maximize authenticity and viewer engagement. The detailed information about candidates' fears, traumas, and behavioral triggers had been used to create personalized torture experiences. I managed to escape and contact the police, but the investigation has revealed the complexity of prosecuting crimes that exist primarily in international dark web networks. Morrison Holdings was apparently just one front for a larger operation that used multiple recruitment agencies across different countries. The police have explained that my case is part of an international investigation into networks that use legitimate businesses to source victims for dark web red rooms. Recruitment agencies provide perfect cover for the systematic identification and selection of people who won't be immediately missed. More disturbing is learning that the recruitment industry's standard practices, psychological profiling, background checks, and candidate assessment are being systematically exploited to identify ideal victims for red room broadcasts. Professional recruitment tools are being perverted into victim selection mechanisms. I'm now in protective custody while investigators determine the scope of Morrison Holdings' operation and my unwitting role in facilitating systematic murder. They've warned me that the legal implications are complex, as my professional activities created evidence trails that could be misinterpreted. The most horrifying realization is that dozens of people died because I successfully matched them to Morrison Holdings requirements. Every commission payment I received represented someone who was tortured and murdered for dark web entertainment, and I'd been proud of my placement success rate. I keep thinking about all the candidates I interviewed, assessed, and placed with Morrison Holdings. People who trusted me to find them legitimate employment, but who I unknowingly delivered to systematic torture and death. My professional expertise in matching people to roles had been corrupted into optimizing victim selection. The detailed psychological profiles I created are now evidence in murder investigations spanning multiple countries. Information I gathered to help people find suitable employment has become documentation of systematic victim selection. For international Red Room networks, the investigation has revealed that Morrison Holdings was generating substantial revenue through their dark web operations, with thousands of subscribers paying premium rates for psychologically authentic torture content. My recruitment expertise had become a valuable commodity in markets that consume genuine suffering as entertainment. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to provide testimony about how my recruitment practices were exploited to facilitate international Red Room operations. But the investigators have warned me that the psychological manipulation I experienced makes it difficult to determine where legitimate business ended and criminal exploitation began. The most terrifying thought is that Morrison Holdings network is probably targeting other recruitment consultants right now. How many agencies might be unknowingly sourcing victims for dark web red rooms? How many recruitment professionals might be earning commissions from systematic murder without realizing what they're facilitating? The recruitment industry provides perfect access to detailed personal information, psychological assessment capabilities, and legitimate reasons for identifying people with specific vulnerabilities. Recruitment consultants are trained to match people to roles, to assess psychological suitability, and to maintain professional relationships that build trust. Morrison Holdings understood exactly how to exploit recruitment practices, presenting requirements that seemed unusual but professionally reasonable, while systematically gathering information needed for victim selection and torture optimization. I spent years learning to match people to opportunities that would improve their lives, only to discover that my expertise was being used to match people to scenarios that would end their lives in the most horrific ways possible. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so devastating. Tomorrow's testimony will reveal how extensively my recruitment expertise was used to facilitate international Red Room operations that generated entertainment for thousands of dark web viewers. But I already know that I'll never be able to work in recruitment again. The recruiter becomes the unwitting talent scout for systematic murder, and there's no way to unknow that every successful placement resulted in someone's death. And somewhere out there, Morrison Holdings Network is probably reviewing CVs from other recruitment agencies, looking for the next batch of victims to torture and kill for their dark web entertainment business. I thought I was helping people find better jobs. Instead, I was helping killers find better victims. The commission structure finally makes sense. I was being paid per head delivered for slaughter, and the performance bonuses were based on how well my candidates screamed. Imagine discovering that someone has been watching you through your bedroom window for months, filming your most private moments, and selling the footage online to strangers. Now imagine that this isn't happening to just you, but to thousands of people across the country, probably the world, all completely unaware that their lives have become entertainment for perverts with deep pockets. The worst part? It's not some far-fetched nightmare scenario. It's happening right now. I stumbled across it by accident, if you can call 3 months of deliberate searching an accident. I was writing my dissertation on digital privacy and anonymity networks for my media studies degree at Manchester. Proper academic research, you understand. I wasn't some basement dweller looking for thrills. I had ethics approval forms and everything. The Tor browser had been running on my laptop for weeks. I'd bookmarked the usual suspects, a few cannabis marketplaces, some forums discussing encryption, the odd political dissent site. Standard fare for someone studying how people communicate when they don't want to be watched. My supervisor, Dr. Chen, had given me a reading list of academic papers about online anonymity, but I wanted primary sources, real examples. That's how I found the link. It was buried in a forum post about internet freedom, sandwiched between complaints about government surveillance and discussions of VPN protocols. Just a string of random characters ending in .onion with a single word underneath. Rooms. The site took ages to load. That's normal on Tor. Everything crawls along at the speed of dial-up. When it finally appeared, it looked like something from the early days of the internet. Black background, green text, no images. Just a list of what looked like chat room names, each with a number next to it. The numbers were small, usually single digits. I clicked on one called Yorkshire Evening. The page that loaded had a simple interface, a text box at the bottom, a larger window above showing messages. But there were no messages, just a counter at the top showing 3 viewers and a button that said Request Access. I sat there for about 10 minutes, watching the viewer count fluctuate between 2 and 5. Nothing else happened. No messages appeared, no instructions. Just that green text on black and the gentle hum of my laptop fan. It felt like standing outside a shop with blacked out windows, knowing people were inside but unable to see what they were doing. I tried a few other rooms. Same setup. View accounts, empty chat windows, that request access button. The names were mundane enough. Brighton Pier, Camden Market, Sunday Roast. They could have been tourism websites or local community groups, but something about the whole thing felt wrong. The way the viewer numbers changed constantly, as if people were flicking between rooms, watching, waiting. After about an hour, I closed the browser and went back to my dissertation. I had enough material about dark web marketplaces and didn't need to go down whatever rabbit hole that site represented. Dr. Chen would be pleased with my chapter on cryptocurrency adoption in illegal markets. That was proper academic work. But I kept thinking about those rooms, the way they just sat there, empty but watched. Over the next few days, I found myself opening the site again, checking the viewer counts, watching the numbers change. It became a habit, like checking social media or the weather. A few minutes here and there between writing chapters and attending seminars. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening. I'd been working late in the university library, and when I got back to my flat in Fallowfield, I opened the site almost without thinking. The viewer count on Yorkshire Evening was higher than usual, nearly 20 people, and for the first time, there were messages in the chat window. They weren't conversation exactly, more like coordinates, times and dates, grid references. Someone had posted 53.4 degrees north, 2.2 degrees west, Thursday, 23:30. And others were responding with single words. Confirmed. Watching. Ready. I recognized those coordinates. They were for somewhere in Manchester city centre, near the cathedral, about 15 minutes from where I was sitting. The rational part of my brain knew I should close the browser and forget about it. These were clearly people planning something, and coordinates with specific times suggested it wasn't just chat. But the researcher in me was curious. What were they planning? Was this some kind of urban exploration group? A photography meetup? The coordinates were for a public area. What could they possibly be doing there that required such secrecy? Thursday came and went. I didn't go to the coordinates, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. I found myself checking the news for incidents in Manchester city centre, scanning local police Twitter accounts for anything unusual. Nothing appeared. Whatever had happened, if anything, hadn't made the news. The following week, new coordinates appeared. This time for Liverpool, then Birmingham. Always a major city. Always with that same pattern of confirmations and single-word responses. I started keeping a notebook, writing down the coordinates and times. Not because I planned to do anything with them, but because documenting patterns is what researchers do. The pattern was monthly, third Thursday of each month, around 11:30 at night. Always city centres, always near major landmarks or transport hubs. The coordinates were precise, not just somewhere in Birmingham, but specific to within a few meters. After 3 months of watching, I decided to visit one of the locations. Not during the appointed time, obviously. I wasn't stupid. But I wanted to see what was there, what might draw these people to those specific spots. The coordinates for that month were for a location near Liverpool Street Station in London. Easy enough to visit during the day under the pretense of legitimate research. The location was a small side street off the main road, narrow, with old Victorian buildings that had been converted into flats above shops. During the day, it was busy enough. People cutting through to avoid the crowds on the main street. Workers from nearby offices grabbing lunch. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain why someone would choose to meet there at 11:30 on a Thursday night. But as I walked down the street, I noticed something odd. Several of the buildings had small security cameras mounted on the walls. Not the usual CCTV you see everywhere in London, but smaller, more discreet ones. They were angled to cover the street from different positions, creating overlapping fields of view. It struck me that you'd have very comprehensive coverage of anyone walking down that street. I went back to Manchester and thought about what I'd seen. Coordinates, confirmations, a location with extensive camera coverage. It was starting to form a picture I didn't like. The next month, I made a decision that I still regret. I went to the Manchester location at the appointed time. It was raining that Thursday night, the kind of fine drizzle that soaks through your jacket without you noticing. I'd positioned myself about 50 meters from the coordinates in the doorway of a closed shop where I could see the street but remain hidden. I told myself I was just observing, that I'd leave at the first sign of anything dodgy. At 11:20, a figure appeared at the far end of the street. They walked slowly, deliberately, checking something on their phone. At 25 past, another person arrived from the opposite direction. They didn't acknowledge each other, but both stopped near the exact coordinates I'd written down. By 11:30, there were 5 people standing in roughly the same area. None of them spoke. They just stood there, occasionally glancing around or checking their phones. I was beginning to think this was the most boring conspiracy I'd ever witnessed when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Each of them was holding a small device, something about the size of a smartphone, but with what looked like a small lens on one end. And they were all pointing these devices in the same direction, toward the residential buildings that lined the street. I followed their gaze and saw what they were looking at. In one of the upper floor windows, there was a light on. Just a normal household light. But in the window, I could see the silhouette of someone moving around. Someone who had no idea they were being watched. The group stood there for exactly 30 minutes. Then, without any signal I could detect, they all began to walk away in different directions. The whole thing had taken place in complete silence. I waited until they were all gone before I walked home. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my front door. I just witnessed something that felt deeply wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. A group of people with cameras watching someone's flat. It could have been innocent, amateur photographers, urban explorers, even researchers like myself. But the secrecy, the coordinates, the synchronized timing, none of that suggested innocent activity. The next day, I went back to the dark website. The viewer count for Yorkshire Evening was back to normal levels, but there was new activity in the chat. People were posting what looked like file names. MCR2311, window4.mp4, MCR2311, kitchen2.ave. The files were followed by strings of numbers and letters, Bitcoin wallet addresses. I realized I was looking at a marketplace. The coordinates weren't meeting points for urban exploration or photography. They were organized surveillance sessions. People were gathering to film strangers in their homes and then selling the footage online. That was disturbing enough. But as I dug deeper into the site, I found something worse. Some of the room names weren't locations at all. They were what looked like names or descriptions. Red hair student, night shift nurse, single mum bedtime. These weren't random voyeurism sessions. They were targeted. Someone was identifying specific individuals and organizing groups to film them. The Bitcoin addresses suggested people were paying for custom content. I felt sick. This wasn't academic research anymore. I'd stumbled into something that was actively harming real people. People who had no idea they were being watched, filmed, and potentially stalked. The rational thing would have been to contact the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd found a website on the dark web where people might be doing something illegal. That I'd witnessed a group of people standing on a street corner with cameras. I had no proof of wrongdoing, no evidence that actual crimes were being committed. Instead, I tried to dig deeper. I wanted to understand the scale of what I'd found, to gather enough evidence to make a proper report. I started monitoring the site more systematically, documenting the patterns, screenshotting the conversations. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The site wasn't just organizing surveillance, it was a complete ecosystem. People would post requests, descriptions of individuals they wanted filmed. Others would volunteer to do the filming. The footage would be edited and sold. There were even reviews and ratings for the people doing the filming. But the most disturbing part was how organized it all was. This wasn't a few perverts with cameras. There were hundreds of people involved, maybe thousands. The Bitcoin transactions suggested serious money was changing hands. Someone was running this as a business, and the targets weren't random. They were often vulnerable people, students living alone, single parents, people working night shifts. The kind of people who might not notice if someone was watching their flat, or who might not be believed if they reported feeling like they were being stalked. I started having trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about those silhouettes in windows, people going about their evening routines, while strangers with cameras watched from the street below. I began checking my own windows obsessively, making sure the curtains were closed, looking for unusual activity outside. The paranoia was probably irrational. I lived in a shared house with 3 other students. We were on the ground floor with a small front garden that would make surveillance difficult. But knowing what I knew about how these people operated, I couldn't shake the feeling that I might be next. That's when I noticed the van. It was parked on my street when I got home from university on a Friday afternoon. Nothing unusual about that. Parking was always tight in our area. But it was still there when I left for the pub that evening, and when I came back around midnight. The next morning, it had moved to a different spot, but it was still on the same street. I probably wouldn't have thought anything of it if not for what I'd learned about the surveillance network. But once you know how these things work, you start seeing patterns everywhere. The van was always positioned where it had a clear view of our house. The windows were tinted so you couldn't see inside, and it moved regularly, just enough to avoid drawing attention. I started taking photos of it, documenting when it appeared and where it parked. I even walked past it a few times, trying to see if anyone was inside. But the windows were too dark, and I didn't want to be too obvious about looking. After a week of this, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. The van probably belonged to someone who worked in the area or was visiting a friend. I was letting what I'd discovered online affect my perception of reality. That's what happens when you spend too much time staring into the dark corners of the internet. But then I found my address in the site's chat logs. It was buried in a conversation about Manchester targets, listed alongside 2 other addresses in my area. Someone had posted it with a description that matched my appearance and mentioned my university. They knew where I lived, what I looked like, and where I studied. The worst part was the response. Other users were bidding for the surveillance job, offering to provide footage within the week. The highest bid was nearly £200. I'd gone from researcher to target without realizing it. Someone had identified me, probably through my digital footprint, and put me up for sale on their surveillance marketplace. The van outside my house wasn't paranoia, it was reconnaissance. I packed a bag and left Manchester that night, told my housemates I had a family emergency and would be gone for a few weeks. I drove to my parents' house in Chester and stayed there for a month, claiming I needed to focus on my dissertation without distractions. During that time, I tried to report what I'd found to the police. I called the non-emergency number and explained about the dark website and the surveillance network. The officer I spoke to was polite, but clearly didn't understand the technical aspects of what I was describing. He took down my details and said someone would get back to me, but no one ever did. I tried contacting some of the cybercrime units, but without concrete evidence of specific crimes, they weren't interested. What I'd found was disturbing, but it existed in a legal grey area. Standing on public streets with cameras isn't illegal. Selling footage of people in their homes might be, but proving that was happening would require an investigation that no one seemed willing to undertake. Eventually, I had to go back to Manchester to finish my degree. I changed my address, moving to a different part of the city. I bought thick curtains for all my windows and developed a habit of checking the street before leaving my flat. The van never reappeared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I finished my dissertation on a completely different topic. Dr. Chen was disappointed that I'd moved away from my original research into dark web marketplaces, but I told him I'd found the subject too depressing to continue with. He probably thought I was being oversensitive. The surveillance site is still online. I check it occasionally, using different computers and IP addresses, just to see if it's still active. It is. The room names change, the coordinates shift to different cities, but the pattern continues. People gathering to film strangers, selling the footage to whoever wants to buy it. Sometimes I think about the person I saw in that window in Manchester. The silhouette moving around their flat, completely unaware that 5 people were standing in the street below, recording their every movement. I wonder if they ever found out. I wonder if they ever felt that creeping sensation that someone was watching them, or if they just went about their life, never knowing that their privacy had been violated and sold to strangers online. The thing that disturbs me most isn't the surveillance itself, although that's bad enough. It's how organized it all is, how many people are involved, how much money is changing hands. What I found wasn't some small group of perverts with cameras. It was an industry. And if they could identify me from my digital footprint, if they could find my address and put me up for sale on their marketplace, then they can do the same to anyone. Your address might already be on one of those sites. Someone might already be bidding for footage of you going about your daily routine. You'll probably never know. That's the worst part. You'll never know if that van parked outside your house is just a van, or if someone inside is watching you through tinted windows. You'll never know if that person lingering on the street corner is just waiting for a bus, or if they're pointing a camera at your bedroom window. You'll never know, but now you'll always wonder. And that's exactly what they want. I moved to Seoul 3 years ago to teach English at a private academy. The transition from my small Midwestern hometown to one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world was jarring in ways I hadn't anticipated. The crowded subway stations, the constant digital advertisements on every surface, the blinding speed of the internet, all of it overwhelmed me initially. But humans adapt. After 6 months, I barely noticed these things anymore. What I did notice was my growing sense of isolation. Despite being surrounded by millions of people, my limited Korean and cultural differences created invisible barriers. Most of my social interactions were with other foreign teachers who came and went as their contracts ended. The few Korean friends I made were busy with demanding jobs and family obligations. Gradually, my world narrowed to my small apartment, the academy where I taught, and the convenience store on the corner. I'm telling you this to explain why I spend so much time online. In a city where I often felt invisible, the internet offered connection. I joined forums for expatriates, video chatted with family back home, and participated in online gaming communities. My laptop became my primary window to human interaction beyond the superficial conversations at work. My apartment came with the fastest internet connection I'd ever experienced, a common feature in Seoul, where digital infrastructure is prioritized. Downloads that would have taken hours back home completed in seconds. Video calls never lagged. Streaming was instantaneous. This remarkable connectivity became something I took for granted until the night it inexplicably faltered. It started with minor disruptions, buffering videos, delayed messages, dropped calls. Frustrating but not unusual, even in Seoul. I ran speed tests showing significantly reduced bandwidth. Thinking it might be a building-wide issue, I messaged my neighbor, another English teacher, who often helped me navigate these small annoyances of expatriate life. He reported no problems with his connection. I contacted my internet provider, navigating their automated customer service system with my limited Korean. After several redirections, I received a message that a technician would check the external connections to my building the following day. Until then, I would have to manage with the degraded service. That night, trying to video chat with my sister, the connection became so poor that her image froze repeatedly, her voice cutting in and out until we gave up. After ending the failed call, I noticed something odd. Despite the video call being disconnected, my laptop's network activity indicator showed continuous data transfer, uploading and downloading at significant rates. I opened my network monitoring application, something I rarely used but had installed months earlier when troubleshooting a different issue. The interface displayed active connections between my device and multiple unfamiliar IP addresses. Data was flowing through ports I hadn't authorized. My first thought was malware. Perhaps I'd clicked something I shouldn't have, and now my computer was part of some botnet. I initiated security scans, closed all applications, and even physically disconnected from the internet by unplugging my router. The network activity indicator went dark, as expected. I reconnected and immediately observed the unauthorized data transfer resuming. The security scans found nothing suspicious. The next day, the internet technician arrived while I was at work. When I returned home that evening, I found a note in broken English explaining that no issues had been detected with the external connection. The technician had reset my router and suggested the problem might be with my laptop. The note included standard recommendations: restart the device, clear the cache, check for system updates. I followed these instructions, even performing a system restore to a point weeks earlier. The unauthorized network activity continued. What changed was my internet speed, no longer degraded, but functioning at its usual remarkable pace, despite the mysterious data transfers happening in the background. That night, I received a message from a username I didn't recognize on a messaging platform I rarely used. The message contained only a link, no text. Normally, I would never click such a thing, but exhaustion and frustration had worn down my usual caution. The link led to what appeared to be a troubleshooting forum in Korean. Using a browser translation tool, I could make out technical discussions about network routing, VPN configurations, and bandwidth allocation. One thread caught my attention, a conversation about something called passive nodes in residential networks. The translation was imperfect, but I gathered that certain high-speed connections in densely populated areas could be utilized as relay points for data transmission without the user's knowledge. The thread described this as a common practice among certain online communities requiring anonymized traffic. As I scrolled through the discussion, a private message appeared from a forum user with the name Node Manager. Translated, The message asked if I was experiencing connectivity issues and offered assistance. I hesitantly explained my situation, the unexplained data transfers, the initial speed degradation, the failed troubleshooting attempts. The response came quickly, explaining that my internet connection had likely been incorporated into a private routing network without my authorization. The initial slowdown occurred during the integration process, but now that my connection was fully configured as a node, the system was allocating resources more efficiently, allowing both normal usage and background data relay. I asked what kind of data was being transmitted through my connection. The response was vague. Secure communications requiring privacy protection, nothing illegal, nothing that would be traced back to me. When I expressed concern about having my network used without consent, Node Manager offered to remove my connection from their system for a fee in cryptocurrency. This had all the hallmarks of a scam, but the technical details matched exactly what I was experiencing. I declined the payment option and stated my intention to report this to my internet provider and local authorities. The final message I received contained just 2 words in English: "Watch first." A moment later, a link appeared. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I clicked it. The page that loaded had a minimal interface, a black background, a video player in the center, a timestamp, and a view account showing 17. The video showed an empty room with white walls. The timestamp indicated the feed was live. For several minutes, nothing happened. I was about to close the browser when a person entered the frame. Their face was obscured by digital pixelation, but their body language suggested nervousness. They sat in a chair facing the camera and held up a piece of paper with writing I couldn't read from the angle shown. The viewer count increased to 23. A small text field appeared below the video, showing messages in various languages. Using translation tools, I could see viewers asking for the subject to perform specific actions. Most requests were simple: raise a hand, stand up, turn around. The person complied with each instruction, movements becoming increasingly reluctant as the request continued. I closed the browser, deeply disturbed by whatever I had witnessed. Within seconds, my messenger pinged with another message from Node Manager. An image of my face, captured moments earlier through my laptop's webcam, which I had never activated. Below the image was text explaining that my network node was being used to route encrypted streams for a private viewing community. Attempting to interfere would result in my transition from relay point to content subject. I shut down my laptop immediately, unplugged all devices, and spent a sleepless night contemplating my options. The next morning, I purchased a new laptop and a mobile hotspot from a provider different from my home internet service. Using this completely separate connection, I researched what I had stumbled into. Information was sparse and contradictory. Some sources dismissed red rooms as urban legends, technically impossible due to bandwidth limitations of anonymized networks. Others suggested they existed, but were elaborate scams. Staged performances marketed as authentic to separate cryptocurrency from gullible viewers. A few troubling accounts described them as genuine operations run by technically sophisticated criminal networks exploiting high-speed infrastructure in countries with advanced digital ecosystems. South Korea, with its extraordinary connectivity and dense urban population, appeared repeatedly in these discussions. The country's internet speeds, among the fastest globally, made it ideal for services requiring substantial bandwidth. Its urban density meant residential connections could be compromised without drawing attention, lost in the digital noise of millions of concurrent users. I considered reporting my experience to authorities but hesitated. My visa status made me reluctant to draw official attention. My limited Korean would make explaining the technical nuances difficult. Most importantly, I had no evidence beyond the messages on my compromised laptop, which I was now afraid to access again. Instead, I contacted a cybersecurity consultant recommended in an expatriate forum. We met in a busy cafe where I explained the situation. His expression remained neutral throughout my account, but his questions became increasingly specific about the interface I had seen, the routing methods described, and the patterns of data transfer. After I finished, he explained that what I had encountered was unfortunately real. Certain buildings in Seoul, particularly those with direct connections to the city's advanced fiber infrastructure, were specifically targeted for integration into these networks. Foreign residents were preferred targets, less likely to report issues, more likely to attribute problems to cultural or language misunderstandings, often living alone with fewer people to notice strange digital occurrences. The consultant offered to secure my new devices and investigate my home network for a substantial fee. Desperate for help, I agreed. 2 days later, he came to my apartment, bringing specialized equipment to analyze the connection without directly engaging with it. His examination confirmed what Node Manager had claimed. My internet service had been configured as a relay node for encrypted streams, with a secondary function allowing remote access to connected devices. The modification was sophisticated, operating at the router firmware level. Simply replacing the router wouldn't solve the problem, as the access point in the building's telecommunications closet had also been compromised. Moving to a different provider wouldn't help either, as most used the same physical infrastructure in this area. The consultant implemented temporary security measures, a hardware firewall, encrypted DNS services, VPN protocols, while acknowledging these were bandages on a more fundamental problem. His recommendation was blunt: move to a different building as soon as possible. Until then, assume all connected devices were potentially compromised. I began searching for a new apartment immediately, but lease terms in Seoul are complicated, typically requiring substantial deposits and minimum stay periods. Breaking my current contract would mean losing thousands of dollars I couldn't afford to forfeit. A week after implementing the security measures, I received a paper letter in my mailbox, unusual in itself, as most communications in Seoul are digital. The letter contained a printed screenshot of my new laptop's desktop, taken the previous day, along with a list of websites I had visited while researching new apartments. The message was clear: the security measures had failed or been circumvented. That night, my apartment lost power briefly, just a few seconds, but long enough to reset all electronic devices. When service resumed, the hardware firewall the consultant had installed showed its configuration had been reset to default settings. The VPN connection had disconnected. The specialized DNS settings had reverted. I contacted the consultant again, who seemed genuinely disturbed by this development. The level of access required to coordinate a targeted power interruption with immediate reconfiguration of security devices suggested resources beyond typical hackers. He advised me to leave the apartment immediately, even if it meant financial loss. I spent that night in a hotel, using only my mobile phone with a new SIM card purchased with cash. In the morning, I returned to my apartment to pack essential items, planning to stay with a colleague until finding new housing. As I entered, my phone received a notification despite being disconnected from Wi-Fi and using the new SIM. The message contained my current location coordinates and the simple text, "Node status remains active." I packed quickly, taking only what would fit in a backpack. As I was leaving, my neighbor, the one who had reported no internet issues, was entering his apartment. He nodded in greeting, then paused, looking at my backpack. He asked in perfect English if I was going somewhere. When I vaguely mentioned visiting a friend, he smiled and said perhaps my internet issues would be resolved when I returned. Something in his expression made me deeply uncomfortable. I mumbled a response and hurried away, but not before noticing a small pin on his lapel, a design I recognized from the forum, where I had first encountered discussions of passive nodes. The icon resembled a stylized eye with a digital motif. I never returned to that apartment. I forfeited my deposit, left most of my possessions, and moved to a different district of Seoul. I changed jobs, altered my online presence, and replaced all electronic devices. For several months, I detected no unusual network activities or unexplained communications. Then yesterday, while using a public Wi-Fi connection at a cafe I'd never previously visited, I received an email to an address I had created only weeks earlier and shared with no one. The message contained a single image, a screenshot of the coffee shop's security camera feed showing me sitting at my current table, captured moments earlier. Below was a view account, 31. I don't know if I'll ever escape this network. It exists in the infrastructure itself, in the invisible digital pathways we've woven through our modern world. Sometimes I wonder how many others are unknowingly serving as nodes, their connections becoming conduits for streams they'll never see, their cameras capturing moments they don't know are being shared. The internet has no memory limitations, no capacity for mercy, no mechanism for true deletion. Somewhere in that vast digital architecture, everything is preserved, including, I suspect, whatever they recorded through my devices during those weeks. I've become content in a library I can't access, viewed by people I'll never identify. What terrifies me most isn't that I'm still being watched. It's the possibility that I always was, that the entire digital ecosystem we've built is fundamentally, architecturally designed for observation, not by governments or corporations, but by whoever has the technical skill to access its deeper functions. And in that shadow network, latency isn't just a measure of connection speed. It's the delay between becoming a node and realizing you've always been a subject. I've been sitting on this story for nearly 3 years now. Every time I consider sharing it, something stops me. Maybe fear, maybe guilt, maybe the knowledge that once it's out there, I can't take it back. But after what happened last Tuesday, I need to get this off my chest. Some things you just can't explain to someone who hasn't seen what the internet really hides. It started with boredom, honestly. Nothing dramatic, no tragic backstory. Just a guy with too much time on his hands and a fancy gaming PC that could handle pretty much anything. I'd recently moved to Bristol for a job in IT security, ironically enough. I was living alone for the first time, in one of those cookie-cutter apartment blocks they keep throwing up near city centres. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbours sneeze, but somehow I still felt isolated. My friends were all back in Birmingham, and I wasn't great at the whole making new connections thing. So I spent a lot of nights at home, gaming or browsing the web. I'd known about the dark web for years, of course. Anyone in IT security does. I'd even accessed it a few times for research purposes during uni, checking out how certain black markets operated so we could better understand security vulnerabilities. Nothing sinister, just academic curiosity. But on this particular night, a rainy Tuesday in October, I was especially restless. I'd finished a 12-hour shift sorting out a ransomware issue for a client, and my brain was still buzzing even though my body was exhausted. That weird combination where you're too tired to do anything productive, but too wired to sleep. So I set up a secure browser, connected through a couple of VPNs, force of habit from work, and started browsing. At first, it was just the usual stuff. Marketplaces selling drugs, forums discussing privacy, sites offering counterfeit documents. I remember the soft blue glow of my monitor reflecting on my coffee mug, the one with the faded Liverpool FC logo that I'd had since uni. My eyes were getting heavy, and I was about to call it a night when a notification popped up on one of the forums I'd been browsing. Someone had messaged me directly, which was unusual. I'd been lurking, not posting. I wasn't even using a regular username, just a randomly generated string of characters. The message was simple, asking if I was looking for something specific. I almost ignored it. My IT security brain was throwing up red flags like crazy. But there was that curiosity again, that same itch that had gotten me browsing the dark web in the first place. I responded non-committally, saying I was just exploring. The conversation that followed seemed benign enough, just someone being friendly, asking about my interests, how long I'd been on the forum. Looking back, they were clearly probing to see if I was law enforcement, but at the time, it just felt like casual chat. I was distracted anyway, half watching a YouTube video in another window, and occasionally getting up to stretch my legs or refill my coffee. My flat had that faintly musty smell it always got when it rained. I never could figure out where the dampness was coming from. About 20 minutes into the conversation, they shared a link. Said it might interest me based on what we'd been discussing, which had drifted to the topic of how much of what people claimed about the dark web was urban legend versus reality. I hesitated. Clicking random links on the dark web is basically security suicide 101. But they mentioned it was a forum specifically discussing the myths and realities of services for hire on the dark web, supposedly debunking the hitman for hire sites as scams, which they mostly are. I was genuinely interested from a professional standpoint. I'd been teaching a module on digital security that touched on exactly this subject. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I really should have known better. I'd literally spent that morning cleaning up after a ransomware attack that started with someone clicking a suspicious link. But it was late, I was tired, and my judgment was compromised. I clicked. It took me to what looked like another forum, but more sophisticated than most dark websites. Clean design, proper formatting. None of the clunky early 2000s aesthetics that dominate most .onion domains. I had to create an account to view most of the content, which again set off alarm bells, but I used all my usual precautions: temporary email, generated password, fake details. The verification process was more thorough than usual, requiring me to complete a series of puzzles rather than just clicking a link. That should have been another warning sign, but I was mildly impressed by the security measures. Professional curiosity, I suppose. Once in, I browsed a few threads. It seemed legitimate enough. Discussions about various dark web services, debates about which ones were scams, analyses of how law enforcement tracked these kinds of operations. There was a whole section dedicated to service provider vetting that claimed to verify whether sellers of various illegal services were legitimate or not. I remember my eyes starting to sting from staring at the screen too long, and I rubbed them, noticing the stubble on my chin. I hadn't shaved in days, hadn't really needed to, since I was working remotely that week. Then I noticed a locked thread titled Verification Events. It had thousands of views, but only a handful of replies. Something about the clinical terminology made me uneasy, but I was already in too deep. I clicked it, only to get a message that this section was for verified members only. Below, it was a link to apply for verification. The application form was brief, asking about my interests and what I hoped to gain from verification. I was vague, saying I was researching the reality behind dark web legends for academic purposes. I didn't expect anything to come of it. These exclusive forums usually ignored new members, so I was surprised when, less than 5 minutes later, I received a notification that my application was being processed and I should remain online. While waiting, I got up to use the bathroom. The linoleum was cold under my feet. I kept meaning to buy a bath mat, but somehow never remembered when I was actually out shopping. When I came back, there was a new notification. My application had been provisionally approved, pending a demonstration verification session that would begin in 10 minutes. There was a countdown timer and instructions to ensure my connection was stable and secure. I should have logged off right then. Every instinct I developed over years in IT security was screaming at me to disconnect. But there was a strange sense of detachment, almost like I was watching someone else make these decisions. I told myself it was just professional curiosity, that I'd watch the demonstration, gather information about how these scams operated, and then report it through proper channels. I even opened a text document to take notes, as if that somehow made what I was doing legitimate research rather than dangerous stupidity. The countdown reached 0, and my screen changed to what looked like a video streaming interface with a chat panel to the right. A message appeared stating that the demonstration would begin shortly, and that this was a proof of capability session for new clients. No interaction or bidding would be permitted during the demonstration. This was observation only. The video began playing. At first, it showed an ordinary street somewhere urban. Could have been anywhere in Britain or Europe. Brick buildings, parked cars, streetlights casting orange pools on wet pavement. The camera appeared to be stationary but high quality, possibly mounted somewhere overlooking the street. A timestamp in the corner showed it was live footage, just minutes behind real time. I remember noticing condensation forming on my window as the rain outside grew heavier, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the building across the street. For several minutes, nothing happened. The chat remained quiet, except for occasional messages confirming that members were connected and viewing. Then a car pulled up, a dark-colored sedan, nothing distinctive. A man got out, looked to be in his 40s, wearing a business suit. He locked the car and started walking down the street, checking his phone. The camera followed him, which meant it wasn't stationary as I'd first thought. Someone was controlling it remotely, tracking this random businessman as he walked. I felt the first real stab of unease. This wasn't a demonstration of a scam. This was surveillance of an actual person. A message appeared in the chat, giving a brief profile of the man. His name, occupation, home address, details about his family, and below that, the reason he'd been selected. Allegations of embezzlement from a company pension fund. Money that belonged to people who had worked their whole lives for a secure retirement. The message explained that this was a contracted demonstration, the fee already paid by former employees who had lost their savings. The clinical tone made it all the more disturbing, like reading a weather report that happened to be describing a hurricane heading straight for you. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be staged, an elaborate performance to convince potential clients that they were legitimate. I almost convinced myself of that until the camera angle changed, and I saw a new figure enter the frame. Someone wearing dark clothing and a nondescript cap, walking on the opposite side of the street in the same direction as the businessman. The chat became more active. Comments appeared noting the operator's approach, discussing the technique being demonstrated. Some mentioned previous demonstrations they'd witnessed, comparing methodologies. I felt sick but couldn't look away. It was like watching a nature documentary where you know the gazelle is about to be taken down by a lion, but it's happening in slow motion. The businessman stopped at a corner, waiting to cross. The operator casually crossed the street, ending up just behind him. They were now both waiting for the traffic light to change. I remember holding my breath, my coffee forgotten and growing cold beside me. The ticking of my cheap wall clock seemed abnormally loud in the silence of my flat. When it happened, it was so quick I almost missed it. As the light changed and people began to cross, the operator moved directly behind the businessman. There was a slight motion, just a small movement of their arm. And then they were walking past, continuing on as the businessman took a few more steps and then suddenly stumbled. At first, it looked like he'd simply tripped. He put his hand against the building to steady himself, then touched his side where the operator had been. His expression changed from confusion to alarm. He looked around, seemingly trying to call out, but no one stopped. He slid down the wall to a sitting position, his briefcase still clutched in one hand. The camera stayed on him as people walked past, most not even noticing the man sitting against the wall. One woman paused, seemed to ask if he was all right, but then moved on when he waved her away. It took less than 3 minutes before his movement stopped completely. Not a single person realized what had happened. To them, it probably just looked like a drunk or someone feeling unwell. The operator was long gone, not even in frame anymore. The camera lingered on the businessman for another minute before the feed cut to black. A message appeared thanking viewers for attending the demonstration and stating that verification of new members had been completed. Those who wished to inquire about services now had access to the necessary channels. I closed my laptop immediately. I felt cold all over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely stand up. I just watched someone being murdered in real time. There was no question in my mind anymore that it was staged. The clinical efficiency, the complete lack of drama, the ordinary setting, it was all too real. I spent the rest of the night pacing my flat, desperately trying to figure out what to do. Go to the police and tell them what? That I'd witnessed a murder somewhere in an unnamed city, committed by someone I couldn't identify, against a victim whose name I only knew from an anonymous forum post. I had no proof, no recording. I hadn't thought to capture the stream, and even if I had, I'd have to admit to being in a place I should never have been. I decided to wait until morning to see if there was any news about a businessman found dead in the street. I checked every news site I could think of, searched for any reports of unexpected deaths or murders. Nothing. Either it hadn't been reported yet, or it had happened somewhere whose local news I couldn't access, or the thought that kept creeping back despite my attempts to suppress it. They were efficient enough to have removed the body before it was discovered. For days afterward, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly. I kept checking the forum, but my account had been deactivated. The link I'd been sent no longer worked. It was as if the entire thing had never existed. I considered anonymous tips to various police departments, but had no idea where to even begin. Which jurisdiction? What details could I provide that wouldn't immediately be dismissed as a hoax or the ravings of a paranoid mind? Eventually, I convinced myself that maybe it had been elaborate theatre after all. A convincing performance designed to scam people out of money for hitman services that would never be delivered. The alternative was too horrible to contemplate, that I had witnessed an actual murder and done nothing about it. I moved flats the next month, telling myself it was because I'd found a better place closer to work. In reality, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I opened my laptop, I imagined someone on the other end monitoring my activity. I changed my phone number, created new email accounts, scrubbed my online presence as much as possible. Professional paranoia turned up to 11. Life gradually returned to something resembling normal. I dated, made a few friends, even got promoted at work. The memory remained, but it became easier to dismiss as a bizarre experience that couldn't possibly have been what it seemed. Until last Tuesday, I was working late, finishing up a security audit for a client, when an email arrived. No subject line sent to my personal account. The new one I'd created after that night. The sender's address was a string of random characters. The message contained only a link and the words, "We've missed your observations. A new demonstration is scheduled." Below it was my home address, my current address, not the flat where I'd been that night 3 years ago. They'd found me. They'd been watching me all along. I've been staying at a hotel since then, paid in cash. I bought a new laptop that I've never connected to any of my accounts. I'm writing this as a record, a warning maybe, though I don't know who it will reach or how. If you're reading this, remember, the dark web isn't just a playground for curious minds or a marketplace for illegal goods. There are corners of it where the darkest human impulses aren't just fantasies, but services rendered with terrifying efficiency. And once you've seen them, they've seen you too. My hotel room door just rattled, like someone trying the handle. The reception desk isn't answering my call. I think I've run out of places to hide. The worst part about finding out your basement was used as a torture chamber isn't the bloodstains. It's realizing you helped pay for the soundproofing. 4 months ago, I was just a small-time landlord in Portsmouth, trying to make enough rental income to cover my mortgage payments. Now, I'm staying in a Premier Inn outside Winchester, and tomorrow the police are going to search the basement flat I've been renting out to what I thought was a quiet, professional tenant who's actually been broadcasting murders to dark web audiences while I collected rent money from upstairs. I inherited the house from my grandmother 2 years ago, a Victorian terrace that had been converted into 3 separate flats. The rental income from the upper 2 floors helps me pay the mortgage while I live in the main house. It's not a huge moneymaker, but it covers the bills and gives me some financial security in an uncertain economy. The basement flat has always been the most difficult to rent. It's below street level, doesn't get much natural light, and feels a bit cramped compared to the other units. Previous tenants usually moved out within 6 months, complaining about the atmosphere or finding somewhere brighter. I'd started to think it might remain empty long term. When Marcus Thompson contacted me about the basement flat, he seemed like the ideal tenant. Professional references, stable income from freelance consulting work, and he specifically requested a quiet private space where he could work from home without disturbances. He was willing to pay 6 months' rent in advance and didn't mind the flat's limitations. Marcus explained that his work involved sensitive client consultations that required complete privacy and discretion. He needed soundproofing installed, which he offered to pay for himself, and requested that I minimize visits to the property unless there were genuine emergencies. This arrangement suited me perfectly, a reliable tenant who wanted to be left alone. The soundproofing work Marcus arranged was more extensive than I'd expected. professional contractors installed industrial-grade acoustic materials throughout the basement flat, along with enhanced ventilation systems and what appeared to be specialized electrical work. Marcus assured me this was all necessary for his consulting business and that it would improve the property's value. After Marcus moved in, the basement flat became remarkably quiet. I rarely heard any activity from downstairs, which was exactly what he'd requested. He kept regular business hours, with occasional evening appointments, and maintained the property well. As far as tenancy arrangements go, it was ideal. Marcus also proved to be an excellent tenant in other ways. He always paid rent on time, never complained about minor issues, and generally required minimal management. He occasionally had visitors for what he described as client meetings, but they were always professional and discreet. The rental income was steady and reliable. About 2 months after Marcus moved in, he asked about making additional modifications to the basement flat. He wanted to install specialized lighting and upgrade the internet connection to support what he called high bandwidth client communications. He offered to cover all costs and assured me the improvements would benefit future tenants. The internet upgrade was substantial: fiber optic cables, commercial-grade equipment, and backup systems that seemed excessive for normal home use. When I asked Marcus about the requirements, he explained that his consulting work involved real-time video communications with international clients who demanded professional quality connections. Marcus's business appeared to be thriving. He mentioned expanding his client base and taking on more complex projects that required enhanced technical capabilities. The basement flat was being equipped to professional standards that would allow him to offer premium services to demanding clients. Around this time, I started noticing unusual activity around the property. Delivery vans arriving at odd hours, often staying for extended periods, while Marcus supervised the unloading of equipment. When I asked about these deliveries, Marcus explained that his business required specialized equipment that needed careful handling and setup. The deliveries became more frequent and elaborate. Professional camera equipment, sophisticated lighting systems, and computer hardware that looked expensive and technical. Marcus assured me this was all legitimate business equipment necessary for his expanding consulting practice. I also noticed that Marcus had begun receiving visitors at unusual hours, late evening appointments that sometimes lasted until dawn, often involving multiple people who would arrive separately and leave at different times. Marcus explained that international clients required flexible scheduling due to time zone differences. The visitors were always discreet and professional, but something about their behavior seemed unusual. They would arrive with their own equipment, work intensively for several hours, then leave with everything they'd brought. Marcus described these as intensive consulting sessions that required complete focus and privacy. About 3 months ago, Marcus approached me about a different type of arrangement. He wanted to sublease the basement flat occasionally to other professionals who required similar facilities for their own consulting work. He offered to increase the rent substantially and assured me that all subletters would meet the same professional standards he maintained. The subletting arrangement seemed reasonable, particularly given the increased income it would provide. Marcus handled all the arrangements directly, screening potential subletters and managing their access to the property. I rarely saw these temporary tenants, but Marcus assured me they were all legitimate professionals. The subletting activity increased the overall usage of the basement flat, but it remained remarkably quiet thanks to the soundproofing Marcus had installed. Occasionally, I'd notice increased electricity usage or signs that multiple people had been using the space, but there were never any disturbances or complaints from neighbors. 2 weeks ago, everything changed when I received an unexpected visit from the police. They were investigating what they described as online criminal activity and had traced some suspicious internet traffic to my property. They asked detailed questions about my tenants and requested permission to examine the basement flat. The police examination revealed that Marcus's consulting business was actually a cover for something much darker. The basement flat had been converted into a sophisticated broadcasting studio designed for creating what they called dark web content. The soundproofing, lighting, and technical equipment weren't for legitimate consulting. They were for producing illegal streams. The investigators explained that the basement flat had been used to broadcast live violence to paying audiences on the dark web. The consulting sessions I'd observed were actually torture and murder sessions being streamed to thousands of viewers who paid to watch authentic suffering rather than staged entertainment. Marcus and his subletters hadn't been running a consulting business. They'd been operating a red room facility. The discreet professional visitors I'd seen were victims being brought to the basement for broadcasts. The extensive equipment deliveries had been setting up a professional murder studio in my own property. The police showed me evidence recovered from the basement flat, computer systems configured for dark web broadcasting, payment processing equipment for handling viewer subscriptions, and recording devices that had captured dozens of murder sessions over the months Marcus had been my tenant. Most disturbing was learning that I'd been unknowingly facilitating systematic murder for entertainment. My rental property had become a venue for dark web red rooms, and I'd been collecting rent money from people who were using my basement to broadcast torture and death to international audiences. The investigation revealed that Marcus's operation was part of a larger network that specialized in using rental properties as temporary red room venues. They would rent properties from unsuspecting landlords, convert them for broadcasting purposes, then relocate before attracting suspicion. The police explained that landlords like me were ideal targets because we provided legitimate cover for their activities while having minimal oversight of what tenants actually did in rented spaces. The rental arrangement created a buffer between their operations and law enforcement, making it difficult to trace their activities. My property had apparently been selected because the basement flat provided the privacy and isolation necessary for red room broadcasting, while the conversion to multiple flats meant that unusual activity would seem like normal rental property management. Marcus had been specifically looking for this type of setup. The legal implications of the situation are complex. While the police don't suspect me of knowing participation, my property was used for serious crimes, and I potentially face civil liability from victims' families. The rental income I received could be characterized as proceeds from criminal activity. More immediately, the property has been sealed as a crime scene while investigators gather evidence. I can't access my own home, can't collect rent from other tenants, and face substantial legal costs, even though I had no knowledge of Marcus's real activities. The investigation has also revealed the scope of Marcus's network. Similar operations have been discovered in rental properties across southern England, all using the same model of targeting small landlords who wouldn't closely monitor tenant activities. I'm apparently just one victim in a much larger scheme. I've been staying in hotels while the investigation continues, unable to return home and uncertain about my legal and financial future. The police have warned me that the case will take months to resolve, and that I may need to testify about my unwitting involvement in facilitating the operation. The most horrifying realization is how easily I was manipulated into providing the perfect venue for systematic murder. Every reasonable request Marcus made, soundproofing, privacy, professional equipment, was actually preparation for broadcasting torture and death to paying dark web audiences. The rental income I thought was helping secure my financial future was actually payment for providing a murder venue. The quiet, professional tenant I appreciated was actually a killer who needed somewhere discreet to broadcast authentic suffering to international subscribers. Tomorrow, forensic teams will begin a detailed examination of the basement flat to gather evidence about the scope of Marcus's operation. They've warned me that the investigation will uncover disturbing details about what happened in my property while I lived upstairs, unaware of the horror taking place below. I keep thinking about all the victims who died in my basement while I went about my normal daily routine overhead. People were being tortured and murdered for entertainment while I watched television, cooked dinner, and slept peacefully, never knowing what was happening one floor below. The police have explained that Marcus's network specifically targets properties where landlords live separately from tenants, creating the isolation necessary for red room operations while maintaining the legitimacy of a normal rental arrangement. My Victorian terrace conversion was perfect for their purposes. I've been advised to contact a solicitor about potential civil liability and criminal implications, even though I had no knowledge of Marcus's activities. The legal system struggles with cases where property owners unknowingly facilitate dark web crimes through legitimate rental arrangements. The financial implications are also substantial. Beyond legal costs, I face potential civil claims from victims' families, possible seizure of rental income received from Marcus, and the costs of restoring the property after forensic examination. My rental business may be effectively finished. I'm writing this from a premier inn outside Winchester, where I'll remain until the investigation concludes and I'm allowed to return home. The police believe Marcus's network is still active and that my cooperation with the investigation may have made me a target for retaliation. The most terrifying thought is how many other landlords might be unknowingly hosting similar operations. How many rental properties across the country might house dark web red rooms? How many small landlords might be collecting rent from systematic killers without realizing what they're facilitating? The rental property market provides perfect cover for these operations. Legitimate business arrangements that create privacy and isolation while deflecting suspicion from criminal activities. Landlords like me become unwitting accomplices to horror we never suspected was happening. Marcus's network understood exactly how to exploit the rental system, targeting properties and landlords that would provide the cover they needed while minimizing the risk of discovery. The conversion to multiple flats, the basement location, my preference for hands-off property management, it all made my property ideal for their purposes. Tomorrow's forensic examination will reveal the full extent of what happened in my basement flat while I collected rent money from upstairs. But I already know that I'll never be able to think of property rental the same way again. The landlord becomes an unwitting venue provider for systematic murder, and there's no way to unknow what your property was really used for. And somewhere out there, Marcus's network is probably targeting other landlords, looking for the next basement flat to convert into a dark web broadcasting studio. I never thought being a landlord could make me complicit in murder, but apparently collecting rent from the wrong tenant can turn your property into a venue for horrors you never imagined. I can't get the sound out of my head, the soft tap of an auction paddle against a palm. It's been 2 years, but I still wake up at 1 in the morning, drenched in sweat. You know how some memories just stick with you, no matter how hard you try to forget. The good ones fade away over time, but the horrific ones, those stay crystal clear. every detail, every smell, every feeling of absolute terror. For me, it's the soft tap of an auction paddle that still jolts me from sleep, the sound of wealth deciding who lives and who suffers. I was working as a freelance photographer for a lifestyle magazine in London, specializing in those behind-the-scenes pieces about trendy bars and restaurants, the kind that make readers feel like insiders to some exclusive world. My editor had sent me to document the Wreathed Heart, this newly renovated Victorian pub in Whitechapel that had become inexplicably popular among finance types and tech entrepreneurs, seemingly overnight. It was late October, that liminal time when London transitions from merely damp to bone-chillingly cold. I remember the peculiar fog that had settled over the East End that evening, how it seemed to swallow the streetlights into hazy coronas. The pub itself was unassuming from the outside, just another historic building with glossy black paint and gold lettering, indistinguishable from 100 others scattered across the city. Inside was different, not what you'd expect from a traditional British pub. No dark wood or worn leather, but minimalist furnishings in blacks and whites, with these disconcerting anatomical drawings of human hearts framed on the walls. Not the cartoon Valentine hearts, but detailed medical illustrations, some showing dissections or peculiar conditions. I remember thinking it was an odd aesthetic choice for a place serving food and drinks. The manager who'd arranged the shoot was a woman named Eleanor, mid-30s, expensively dressed in that deliberately understated way that actually costs more than flashy clothes. She had this practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, like someone who'd learned human expressions from a manual. After showing me around the main bar area, she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that there was a private members' space in the back I should photograph later when it was empty. I spent the first hour capturing the usual shots, bartenders crafting elaborate cocktails, the architectural details, patrons enjoying their overpriced drinks, standard stuff. Around 10, the place began filling with people who looked like they'd just stepped out of boardrooms. Men in bespoke suits, women with that particular kind of polished appearance that speaks of serious money. They carried themselves with the entitled air of people accustomed to doors opening at their approach. What struck me was how they barely ordered drinks. They'd approach the bar, exchange a few words with the bartender, then be directed toward a dark hallway at the back of the pub. None of them returned to the main area. I thought perhaps there was a separate exit, or maybe some exclusive area where they could drink away from the regular clientele. Around midnight, Eleanor returned, seeming slightly tense as she informed me the private area was now available for photography. She led me down that same hallway the wealthy patrons had disappeared into, past the toilets and what looked like storage rooms, to an unmarked black door with a small digital keypad beside it. She entered a code, and I distinctly remember the sound. Not the electronic beep you'd expect, but a soft, mechanical click, like something much older than the sleek technology suggested. Beyond the door was a short corridor ending in another door, this one attended by a man who looked more like military personnel than a bouncer. Close-cropped hair, perfect posture, alert eyes that assessed me with unsettling thoroughness. Eleanor exchanged a few words with him, and he stepped aside, opening the second door. The space beyond was dramatically different from the minimalist modern pub we'd left behind. It was like stepping into a Victorian gentleman's club. Wood-panelled walls, leather armchairs, the air heavy with expensive cigars and whiskey. But something felt off about it, something I couldn't immediately identify. Perhaps it was how the atmospheric lighting seemed designed to obscure rather than illuminate, or how the room was arranged in a semicircle facing a raised platform area at the front, currently empty but spotlit like a stage. Eleanor instructed me to photograph the empty room quickly, explaining that it was a private auction space for rare collectibles and investments, only accessible to their top-tier members. She emphasized that I should focus on the architectural details and ambiance, not any identifying features of the space that might appear in a magazine. I nodded, already framing shots in my mind, thinking this would make for an intriguing centerpiece to my article, the secret room that few knew existed. As I was setting up my tripod, Eleanor was called away by one of the staff. She excused herself, saying she'd return shortly, leaving me alone in that strangely oppressive room. I took the opportunity to explore more freely, noting details that seemed at odds with the rare collectibles explanation. A medical-grade refrigeration unit humming quietly in one corner. Several screens mounted on the walls but currently powered down. Small cameras positioned discreetly throughout the space. On the podium at the front sat an open laptop, its screen showing what appeared to be a spreadsheet with columns for numbers, dates, and what looked like cryptocurrency wallet addresses. Beside it was a stack of black leather-bound portfolios, each with a different Roman numeral embossed in gold. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced toward the door, confirming I was still alone, then carefully opened the top portfolio marked I. Inside were photographs and specifications, but not of art or antiques. The images showed people, men and women of various ages and ethnicities, each photographed in the same clinical style against a white background. Beside each image was detailed information: height, weight, age, blood type, medical history, psychological profile, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be an estimated resilience rating on a scale of 1 to 10. My mind refused to process what I was seeing at first, creating more palatable explanations. Perhaps this was for some exclusive medical treatment program, or an elaborate reality show, or high-end surrogacy services. But the final page of the portfolio shattered any comforting illusions. It contained detailed pricing structures for what it explicitly called direct control sessions of varying durations, with higher rates for terminal experiences. I felt physically ill as understanding crashed over me. This wasn't an auction for objects but for people, for the right to torture and possibly kill them while watching in real time. The refrigeration unit suddenly made horrific sense. It wasn't for wine, but for preserving evidence or trophies. The screens would be for remote bidders, or for displaying the sessions themselves. I must have made some sound, some small gasp of horror, because the door behind me opened. I snapped a hasty photo of the portfolio's contents with my phone before closing it and pretending to adjust my camera settings. Eleanor returned with two men I hadn't seen before, both in dark suits, both moving with the deliberate precision of predators. She asked if I'd finished, her tone perfectly pleasant, but her eyes scanning the room, noting the portfolio that wasn't quite in the same position I'd found it. I forced a smile, saying I needed just a few more shots. My hands were trembling as I pretended to photograph a particularly ornate section of wall paneling. I could feel their eyes on my back, assessing, calculating. Eleanor mentioned casually that their event would begin soon, so I'd need to wrap up. She asked if I'd seen anything interesting while she was gone, her voice still conversational, but carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of threat. I lied, saying I'd been focused on capturing the unique lighting of the space. She smiled that same empty smile and said something about how people often found themselves fascinated by things they didn't understand in this room. As I packed up my equipment, moving with deliberate slowness to appear calm while my mind raced through escape scenarios. The door opened again. A stream of people began entering. The same wealthy individuals I'd seen earlier, now carrying small electronic tablets and what looked like auction paddles made of some dark material. Eleanor guided me toward the exit, her hand on my elbow in what might have appeared to be a polite gesture, but felt more like a restraint. As we approached the door, it opened to admit one last patron, a man I recognized with a sickening jolt. He was a tech CEO who'd been featured in the same magazine I was shooting for, known for his philanthropy and ethical business practices. Our eyes met briefly. Something in my expression must have betrayed my knowledge or horror, because his pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. He leaned toward Eleanor, whispering something that made her grip on my arm tighten painfully. We continued to the corridor where the security man waited. Eleanor instructed him to escort me out through the service entrance since the event was beginning. Something in her tone had changed, a hardness that hadn't been there before. She reminded me that all the photos needed to be approved before publication, and that I'd signed an extensive NDA that covered not just images but any observations made on the premises. The security man led me down a different corridor, one that seemed to take us deeper into the building rather than toward an exit. My heart was hammering so loudly I was certain he could hear it. We passed doors marked with symbols rather than numbers, a circle, a square, a triangle, from behind which I could hear sounds that will haunt me forever. Not screams, which would have been horrific enough, but the muffled, desperate sounds of people trying not to scream. I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't be leaving through any service entrance, that I'd seen and understood too much, that I was being led to one of those rooms with symbols instead of numbers to become part of the night's inventory. Desperation makes you capable of things you never imagined. As we passed a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, I stumbled deliberately, apologizing for my clumsiness, when the security man turned slightly to help me up. I grabbed the extinguisher and swung it with all my strength at his head. There was a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the floor. I ran, no longer caring about stealth, simply needing to find a way out of this nightmare. I tried doors as I passed them, most locked, one opening to reveal a small room with medical equipment and restraints that made me slam it shut immediately. Finally, I found a door marked with the universal fire exit symbol, pushed through it, and found myself in an alley behind the building. I didn't stop running until I was back on a main road, surrounded by late-night revelers who had no idea of the horrors occurring just streets away. I hailed a taxi, giving an address nowhere near my actual home, constantly checking to see if I was being followed. That night, I copied the photo I'd taken of the portfolio to multiple secure locations, then erased all evidence of my assignment from my phone. I scrubbed my social media, packed essential belongings, and by morning was on a train to Edinburgh, where an old university friend had agreed to let me stay without asking questions. I spent weeks debating what to do with what I'd discovered. Going to the police seemed logical, but the man I'd recognized was connected to the highest levels of society and government. The NDA I'd signed contained language I now recognized as thinly veiled threats, and I had only a single photo as evidence, easily dismissed as a forgery or misunderstanding. Eventually, I created an anonymous account and shared what I discovered on forums dedicated to investigating human trafficking and dark web crimes. I included the photo, names I remembered, descriptions of the location and security measures. Some believed me, Others dismissed my story as paranoia or creative fiction. 3 weeks later, the wreathed heart was destroyed in what was reported as a gas explosion. No casualties, since it happened during closed hours. The news mentioned its popularity among London's elite and its unique Victorian interior that had been largely preserved during renovation. I knew it wasn't an accident. It was evidence being erased. But was it because of my posts, or simply a planned relocation of their operation? I'll never know. Since then, I've been moving constantly, never staying in one place long enough to establish connections. I've changed careers, appearance, habits. I use only cash, avoid cameras, stay away from social media. But sometimes, in the faces of the wealthy and powerful on news broadcasts, I catch glimpses of expressions I recognize from that night. That same cold calculation beneath a veneer of respectability. I know now that there are spaces hidden within ordinary places where the elite trade in the ultimate luxury, complete power over human life, where suffering is commodified and sold to the highest bidder, where people like me, who stumble upon their existence, become potential inventory. Sometimes I dream of that auction room. In my dreams, I'm never the photographer, but the subject being displayed on that platform, facing a sea of expressionless faces holding black paddles. And in the front row always sits that tech CEO, smiling as he delicately taps his paddle against his palm, signaling his bid for the right to break me completely. I don't know if they're still looking for me. I don't know if my name is in one of those portfolios now, with my own resilience rating and price point. But I know that somewhere, perhaps behind another unmarked door in another ordinary establishment, paddles are being raised and lives are being sold, and no one who matters is doing anything to stop it. Have you ever wondered what it's like to watch someone being murdered and not realize it until months later? 3 months ago, I was just a night security guard at a business park in Reading, spending my shifts reading books and doing crosswords. Now, I'm in protective custody somewhere in Wales, and my testimony about what I saw through CCTV cameras could expose a Red Room operation that's been broadcasting murders to thousands of viewers, while I unknowingly watched it all happen in real time. I've worked security for Morrison Security Services for about 2 years. It's easy work most of the time. Monitor CCTV feeds, do periodic building checks, log any incidents in the security report. The business park I cover has about 20 units, mostly small manufacturing companies and storage facilities that operate during normal business hours. My job is to make sure nothing gets broken into overnight. The unit that changed everything was Industrial Solutions Loyalty, a company that rented one of the larger warehouse spaces about 4 months ago. According to their lease application, they were in import-export, dealing with specialized equipment for various industries. They kept normal business hours initially, with delivery trucks arriving during the day and staff leaving by early evening. Industrial Solutions was run by a man called David Chen, who seemed professional and legitimate when he signed the lease. He explained that his company required enhanced security and privacy due to the sensitive nature of their work with international clients. This meant upgrading the CCTV coverage in their section of the business park and installing additional monitoring equipment. The upgraded surveillance system was impressive. High-definition cameras with night vision capabilities, audio recording equipment, and monitoring software that could track movement patterns and identify unusual activity. David explained that his clients required this level of security documentation for insurance and compliance purposes. As the security guard responsible for monitoring these feeds, I was trained to use the new equipment and given specific instructions about documenting any activity around industrial solutions. This included logging delivery times, recording visitor details, and maintaining detailed reports about anyone who accessed their facility outside normal business hours. Initially, everything seemed routine. Delivery trucks during the day, occasional evening meetings with what appeared to be international clients, and standard warehouse activities. The enhanced CCTV coverage meant I could monitor their operations more thoroughly than other units, but nothing seemed suspicious or concerning. About 6 weeks after Industrial Solutions moved in, their activity patterns began to change. Instead of finishing by early evening, staff would often remain until very late at night. The types of deliveries also shifted. Fewer commercial trucks and more unmarked vans arriving at unusual hours, often staying for extended periods. David explained these changes when I mentioned them in my security reports. He said the company was expanding into time-sensitive international markets that required round-the-clock operations. The unusual delivery schedule was necessary to coordinate with clients in different time zones who needed immediate access to specialized equipment. The nighttime activities gradually became more frequent and elaborate. I'd watch through the CCTV feeds as people moved equipment around the warehouse, set up what appeared to be temporary work areas, and conducted meetings that sometimes lasted until dawn. The enhanced surveillance system captured everything in remarkable detail. Around this time, David asked me to expand my monitoring responsibilities. Beyond standard security surveillance, he needed detailed documentation of all activities around their facility for what he called operational compliance purposes. This meant reviewing recorded footage, creating timestamped logs of events, and maintaining archives of particularly important activities. The compliance documentation work paid substantially better than standard security duties, and David assured me it was just administrative record keeping required by his international clients. I welcomed the additional income and found the work straightforward enough, essentially creating detailed reports about what I was already observing through the CCTV system. As weeks passed, the activities I was documenting became increasingly unusual. The warehouse would be reconfigured regularly, with temporary structures assembled and dismantled between sessions. Professional lighting equipment would be set up around specific areas, along with what appeared to be sophisticated recording devices. When I asked David about these activities, he explained that Industrial Solutions had expanded into creating training materials and documentation for their international clients. The temporary setups were necessary for filming instructional videos about equipment operation and safety procedures. The training sessions always followed similar patterns: extensive preparation involving equipment setup and lighting configuration, followed by what appeared to be filming activities, then thorough cleanup and equipment removal. My role was to document the timing and participants involved in these sessions for compliance purposes. The people involved in these training sessions seemed to change regularly, with new participants arriving for each filming event. David explained that this was because they were creating materials for different types of equipment and needed specialists with relevant expertise for each training video. What struck me as odd was how the participants behaved during these sessions. Unlike normal training or instructional filming, the people involved seemed distressed or reluctant. When I mentioned this in my reports, David assured me that realistic safety training required participants to demonstrate genuine concern about potential hazards. About 2 months ago, I started noticing technical equipment around the Industrial Solutions facility that seemed more sophisticated than necessary for creating training videos. Multiple camera angles, professional audio systems, and computer equipment that appeared designed for live broadcasting rather than simple recording. David explained that their clients required real-time access to training materials, necessitating live streaming capabilities. The enhanced technical setup allowed them to broadcast training sessions to international audiences who couldn't attend in person. This explained the sophisticated equipment and the emphasis on precise timing for their filming sessions. My documentation responsibilities expanded to include monitoring the technical aspects of these broadcasts, verifying that streaming equipment was functioning correctly, logging connection quality issues, and maintaining records of broadcast durations and viewer access logs that David's system automatically generated. The viewer logs were remarkable in their scope. Thousands of people from around the world were accessing these training broadcasts, with detailed analytics showing viewing patterns, geographic distribution, and engagement metrics. David's operation was clearly successful in reaching international audiences. 1 month ago, everything changed when I discovered what these broadcasts actually were. While reviewing archived footage for compliance documentation, I noticed that one of the computer monitors visible in the CCTV feed was displaying a dark web interface rather than the normal streaming platform David had described. The interface showed the same warehouse space I'd been monitoring, but it was labeled as a red room with viewer count displays and what appeared to be payment processing systems. The training sessions I'd been documenting weren't educational content. They were live torture and murder broadcasts being streamed to paying audiences on the dark web. The participants I'd watched weren't willing trainers demonstrating safety procedures. They were victims being murdered while thousands of people paid to watch. My detailed compliance documentation had been creating evidence of systematic killing for entertainment, and I'd been unknowingly facilitating the operation by providing security oversight. I realized that Industrial Solutions had never been an import-export company. The entire operation was designed to create a legitimate front for dark web red room broadcasting, using my security monitoring to ensure their activities remained undetected, while documenting everything for their own operational purposes. David's emphasis on enhanced security wasn't about protecting valuable equipment. It was about maintaining operational security for systematic murder. The professional CCTV coverage I'd been trained to monitor was partly for his own security, but also to create detailed archives of their broadcasts for premium subscribers. My compliance documentation hadn't been administrative record keeping. It had been creating detailed logs of murder events, participant information, and broadcast analytics that helped David's operation optimize their content for dark web audiences. I'd been an unwitting administrator for a systematic killing operation. When I confronted David about what I'd discovered, he calmly explained that I was already too deeply involved to simply walk away. Months of detailed documentation had created evidence trails that would suggest I was a willing participant, rather than an unknowing observer. My security reports contained information that could only have been gathered through knowing cooperation. David also revealed that my own activities had been under surveillance during this entire period. Security cameras monitoring the security office meant that my reactions to various broadcasts had been documented, showing my gradual normalization of increasingly disturbing content. This footage could be edited to suggest willing participation rather than unknowing observation. I managed to escape and contact the police, but the investigation has revealed the complexity of prosecuting dark web crimes. The broadcasts were accessed through encrypted networks that make traditional evidence gathering extremely difficult. Most of the direct evidence exists in digital formats that require specialized technical knowledge to authenticate. More problematically, my own involvement creates complications for the prosecution. Months of detailed documentation and security monitoring could be characterized by defense lawyers as evidence of willing participation. My gradual acceptance of increasingly unusual activities could be presented as knowing cooperation rather than professional obligation. The police have moved me to protective custody while they investigate, but they've explained that dark web red room cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute successfully. The technology provides multiple layers of anonymity for operators and viewers, while the evidence often relies on witnesses whose own involvement can be questioned. David's operation has apparently shut down and relocated since my escape, but the police believe it's part of a larger network that operates multiple facilities across the country. Industrial Solutions was just one node in a system that uses legitimate business fronts to hide systematic murder broadcasting. The most disturbing aspect is learning how many people were involved in David's network without understanding what they were facilitating. Delivery drivers, equipment suppliers, cleaning services, and utility workers, all unknowingly supporting an operation that broadcast murder to international audiences. My case has become a test for how effectively law enforcement can prosecute dark web crimes using traditional legal frameworks. The police are trying to build a case that doesn't rely too heavily on my testimony, given the complications created by my unwitting involvement in documenting the operation. I've spent weeks in debriefing sessions, helping investigators understand how David's operation functioned and identifying other potential facilities that might be using similar business models. The scale of the network they've uncovered is far larger than anyone initially suspected. The investigation has revealed that Industrial Solutions was generating substantial revenue through their dark web broadcasts, with thousands of subscribers paying premium rates for access to live murder content. The professional quality and systematic operation made their broadcast particularly valuable to audiences seeking authentic material. I keep thinking about all the victims I watched die through those CCTV feeds, not understanding what I was really observing. People who were murdered while I documented their final moments for compliance reports that helped optimize their killer's broadcasting operation. The police have assured me that my cooperation is essential for prosecuting David's network, but they've also explained that the legal process could take years and that successful convictions are far from guaranteed. Dark web crimes exist in legal grey areas that traditional prosecution methods struggle to address effectively. I'm writing this from a safe house somewhere in Wales, where I'll remain until the investigation concludes and the trial process begins. The police believe David's network is still active and that my testimony poses a significant threat to their continued operations. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to meet with prosecutors who will determine whether my evidence is sufficient to build a case against David's network. But they've warned me that the legal challenges are substantial and that my own involvement creates complications that defense lawyers will certainly exploit. The most terrifying realization is that David's operation was just one of many similar networks operating across the country. The business park model provides perfect cover for dark web red rooms, using legitimate commercial spaces to hide systematic murder broadcasting, while unknowing security guards document everything. How many other security guards might be unknowingly monitoring murder broadcasts? How many business parks might house similar operations? How many people might be facilitating systematic killing without understanding what they're really observing? The dark web has made it possible for these operations to exist anywhere, hidden behind legitimate business fronts, broadcasting authentic murder to paying audiences while ordinary people unknowingly facilitate their activities. The technology makes it easy to hide, to pay anonymously, to consume murder as entertainment. I never thought security work could lead to becoming a witness to systematic murder. I thought the biggest risks were dealing with break-ins or equipment failures. I never imagined that monitoring CCTV feeds could make me complicit in facilitating dark web red room operations. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so horrifying. I spent months watching people die while thinking I was just doing my job, creating detailed documentation that helped optimize their murders for entertainment value. Tomorrow's meeting will determine whether my testimony can help prosecute David's network or whether the legal complications make a successful case impossible. Either way, I know I'll never be able to work security again. The guard becomes the witness to systematic murder, and there's no way to unsee what I've documented. And somewhere out there, David's network is probably setting up new operations, recruiting new security guards who don't know they're about to become unwitting administrators for the next generation of dark web entertainment. You'd think working for a tech startup would keep you busy enough to avoid trouble. Turns out the opposite is true when your job involves testing apps that nobody else wants to touch. 6 weeks ago, I was just a QA tester in Bristol trying to make rent on an apprentice's salary. Now I'm writing this from a service station near Cardiff, knowing that tomorrow night I'll become the main attraction for an audience I helped build, without realizing it. I work for a small company called DevCore Solutions. We're one of those firms that test software for other companies, checking for bugs, security vulnerabilities, user experience issues. Most of our clients are legitimate businesses wanting to make sure their apps work properly before launch. But some of our contracts come from less transparent sources, companies that pay well but ask few questions about what we find. The project that changed everything started in early September. My supervisor handed me a tablet loaded with a beta version of an app called StreamVault. The brief was minimal. Test the streaming functionality, check for lag issues, verify the payment integration worked smoothly. No information about who developed it or what it was ultimately intended for. StreamVault looked like any other live streaming platform at first glance. Clean interface, simple navigation, standard features you'd expect from a video app. The difference was in the back end. This wasn't designed for casual users. It had sophisticated access controls, encrypted payment systems, and viewer analytics that were far more detailed than anything I'd seen before. My job was to test it by setting up streams and checking various functions. I'd broadcast from different locations in the office, test the chat features, verify that donations and tips were processing correctly. Standard quality assurance work. The app performed well, better than many mainstream platforms I'd used. What struck me as odd was some of the advanced features buried in the settings. Options for scheduling automated content, systems for managing large-scale viewer numbers, and something called interactive participation protocols that seemed overly complex for a standard streaming app. When I asked my supervisor about these features, he told me to focus on basic functionality testing and not to worry about advanced options unless they caused obvious problems. After several weeks of testing, I was asked to evaluate the app in more realistic conditions. This meant setting up streams from my flat in the evenings, testing the mobile connection, checking how the platform handled different lighting conditions and camera angles. The company provided additional equipment, professional lighting, multiple camera angles, audio equipment that seemed unnecessarily sophisticated for testing purposes. I'd stream myself doing mundane tasks, cooking dinner, working on a laptop, watching television. The streams were supposed to be private, accessible only to other testers, but occasionally I'd notice viewer counts that seemed higher than our small testing team could account for. When I mentioned this, I was told that automated systems sometimes inflated the numbers and not to worry about it. The requests from my supervisors gradually became more specific. Could I test streaming from different rooms in my flat? Could I check how well the low-light cameras worked in the bedroom? Could I verify the audio pickup was clear enough to capture conversation from other rooms? Each request seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they were creating an unusually detailed map of my living space. About 3 weeks into home testing, I started noticing technical irregularities. The app would occasionally activate when I wasn't running tests. I'd find it open on my tablet or phone, showing a black screen but with active viewer counts in the hundreds. The microphone would sometimes show activity when I wasn't speaking, suggesting the app was recording ambient sound. When I reported these bugs, the development team claimed they were working on fixes but needed more data to identify the root cause. They asked me to leave the app running continuously for several days to help them monitor the issues. I agreed, thinking I was helping improve the product. That's when things started getting strange. I'd return home to find small items moved in my flat. Nothing missing, nothing obviously disturbed, just things like my keys being on a different table or books rearranged on shelves. I initially attributed it to stress or absent-mindedness. Then I received an email about expanding my testing role. The company wanted me to evaluate StreamVault's real-world application scenarios. They provided a list of locations around Bristol where I should test the mobile streaming, parks, shopping centres, quiet streets at night. The pay for this expanded testing was substantial, nearly doubling my usual fee. During these location tests, I began noticing people who seemed to be watching me work. Individuals who would appear at multiple test sites, always at a distance but clearly observing what I was doing. When I mentioned feeling observed to my supervisor, he said it was probably just curious passers-by, and that public testing always attracted some attention. The app's functionality continued to evolve during this period. New features appeared in updates, enhanced privacy controls, geographic tagging, integration with cryptocurrency payment systems. The viewer capacity seemed to be increasing as well. During my public tests, I'd sometimes see viewer counts in the thousands. One evening, while testing at home, I decided to explore some of the advanced features I'd been told to ignore. I dug deeper into the analytics section and found logs of all my streaming activity. Not just the official tests, but every time the app had been active, including those instances when I hadn't initiated any streams. The log showed detailed information about each session: viewer numbers, duration of viewing, geographic distribution of the audience, and most disturbing, revenue generated. People had been paying to watch my mundane test streams, my evening routine, my phone calls with friends, my conversations with my girlfriend. All of it had been monetized without my knowledge. I confronted my supervisor the next morning, but he claimed that this was a misunderstanding. The revenue data was fake, generated by the testing system to verify payment functionality. The high viewer numbers were simulated to stress test the servers. Everything I'd seen was just part of the comprehensive testing environment they'd built. But that night, I received a phone call from a blocked number. The voice was distorted, probably through software, but the message was clear. They congratulated me on my excellent testing work and mentioned specific details about my daily routines that could only have come from someone watching the streams very carefully. They explained that StreamVault wasn't just another streaming platform. It was designed for a specific type of content and a particular audience willing to pay premium prices for authentic, unscripted material. My testing phase was concluding, but my participation in the platform was just beginning. That's when I realized I hadn't been testing an app. I'd been conditioning an audience. Thousands of people had been watching me live my normal life, becoming invested in my routines, learning my patterns, developing what the industry calls parasocial relationships. I was no longer just a tester. I was the content. I immediately tried to delete the app from all my devices, but found it wouldn't uninstall. The technical support team at DevCore said they needed to remotely remove it to prevent data corruption, but that process would take several days. In the meantime, the app continued running, continued streaming, continued attracting viewers who are now paying increasing amounts to watch someone who was becoming paranoid and afraid. The requests from my supervisors became more direct. Would I be willing to continue streaming, but now as official content rather than testing? The compensation would be substantial, enough to quit my day job and focus solely on this work. They framed it as a natural progression from testing to implementation. When I refused, strange things started happening around my flat. Mail for previous tenants began arriving addressed to names I'd never heard. Food deliveries I hadn't ordered appeared at my door. People started knocking at odd hours, claiming to be from utility companies or maintenance services, always wanting to come inside to check something. I realized the extended testing period had given them extensive intelligence about my life. They knew my schedule, my habits, my visitors, my vulnerabilities. The app had essentially turned my home into a surveillance center and my daily life into a product. 1 week ago, everything escalated. I came home to find a package containing a new tablet, one I hadn't seen before. When I turned it on, it showed a live stream of the room I was sitting in, but from an angle that suggested the camera was built into the device I was holding. In the corner was a viewer count showing tens of thousands of people watching. But this time, there was also a chat window. Messages were flowing constantly. Comments about my appearance, observations about my living space, questions about my daily routine. Some viewers were offering money for me to answer specific questions or perform certain tasks. Others were discussing what they wanted to see happen next. At the bottom of the screen was a countdown timer, not counting down from weeks or days, just hours, and a message indicating that the beta testing phase was concluded and that live interactive content would begin shortly. I packed what I could carry and left Bristol that night. I've been moving between service stations and cheap hotels since then, paying cash when possible, avoiding main roads, trying to stay ahead of whatever system they have for tracking me. But they keep finding me. Hotel staff who seem to recognize me despite my using different names. Other guests who ask too many questions about my plans. CCTV cameras that seem to follow my movements too precisely. And constant notifications on any device I use that the StreamVault app is trying to install itself. The countdown reached 0 yesterday. Since then, I've been receiving messages on burner phones I've just purchased, texts from numbers I've never seen before. They all contain the same basic information: an address in Cardiff, a specific time tonight, and a reminder about the extensive audience that has been cultivated for this event. They've also sent proof that they know exactly where my family lives. Photos of my sister leaving her house in London, my parents shopping at their local supermarket in Bradford, my girlfriend at her university in Edinburgh. All taken recently, all clearly intended to show me that running isn't just about my own safety anymore. I understand now that DevCore Solutions isn't a normal software testing company. They're a recruitment and conditioning operation for something much darker. They identify suitable candidates, slowly accustom audiences to watching them, build up viewership numbers, and then transition their testers into live interactive content. The beta testing was never about improving an app. It was about training viewers to become invested in watching me. creating demand for more intimate access to my life, and gradually moving toward a final event that apparently thousands of people have now paid to see. I'm writing this from a motorway service station somewhere between Bristol and Cardiff. The address they've given me is less than an hour's drive from here. The designated time is in roughly 6 hours. I've tried calling the police from 3 different locations, but explaining that a streaming app beta test has led to being recruited for what I believe are red room broadcasts sounds insane even to me. The most disturbing realization is that I've been building my own audience this entire time. Every test stream where I acted naturally, every moment of genuine reaction when I noticed strange things happening, every instance of growing paranoia and fear, it's all been content that people have been paying to watch. I'm not just about to become a victim. I'm about to become entertainment for an audience I've been cultivating for months without knowing it. People who feel they know me, who have been following my story, who have been waiting for this conclusion to what they see as an elaborate performance. The counter on the latest message shows viewership numbers I've never seen before. Tens of thousands of people waiting for tonight's conclusion to the beta testing storyline. Payment processing servers working overtime to handle the demand for premium access to whatever they have planned. I keep thinking about all the other beta testers DevCore must have recruited over the years. How many people thought they were just testing an app while actually training an audience to watch them? How many discovered too late what they had really been participating in? Cardiff is getting closer. The time is running out. I could keep driving, head to Scotland, try to disappear completely. But they've proven they can find me anywhere, and now they have leverage over people I care about. The strangest part is knowing that whatever happens tonight will be broadcast to thousands of people who have been following my story from the beginning. People who watched me test streaming equipment in my flat, who saw me gradually become aware of what was happening, who have been anticipating this moment as the natural conclusion to the narrative they've been consuming. I never signed up to be an actor in someone else's show, but I've been performing for months without knowing it. The beta testing was just the audition. Tonight is opening night. The sat-nav shows 30 minutes to the Cardiff address. The clock shows 5 hours until the scheduled time. The viewers are waiting. The cameras are prepared. The show, as they say, must go on. I still don't know if I'll show up or keep running, but I'm starting to suspect it doesn't matter. With an audience this size, this invested, this willing to pay for the conclusion to my story, they'll make sure the show happens one way or another. Have you ever wondered what happens to the parts of yourself you lose in war? Not the obvious bits, the limbs, the hearing, the scars you can see in the mirror. I'm talking about the invisible pieces, the ability to sleep through the night without checking the locks 3 times, the capacity to sit in a restaurant without your back to the wall, the simple faith that most people are fundamentally decent. Those are the parts that don't grow back, no matter how many therapy sessions the doctors threw at you. I came back from Afghanistan in late 2018, medically discharged after an IED took out half my patrol and left me with a collection of metal fragments in my left leg and a head full of memories I couldn't switch off. The physical therapy was straightforward enough. Learn to walk properly again, build up the strength, adapt to the new limitations. The mental side was trickier. The flat they set me up with in Aldershot was decent enough. Ground floor, which suited the leg, and quiet neighbours who minded their own business. The occupational therapist had been very pleased with herself when she'd arranged it. Close to the base for support, she'd said, but far enough away to feel civilian. What she hadn't mentioned was how the silence would press against your ears at night, or how every settling beam and creaking pipe would send your heart racing. Sleep became something that happened to other people. I'd lie there listening to the world outside my window. The occasional car, a fox in the bins, the milk float doing its rounds at 4:30. Sometimes I'd doze off around dawn, only to wake up an hour later feeling worse than when I'd gone to bed. That's how I discovered the internet had a whole world that came alive when the rest of Britain was asleep. Forums for insomniacs, chat rooms for shift workers, communities of people who existed in the margins of normal daylight hours. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just human contact that didn't require explaining why I was awake at 3 in the morning or why crowds made me nervous. The transition from regular internet to the darker corners happened gradually. Someone in an insomnia forum mentioned privacy tools, ways to browse without leaving digital footprints. Given my background, the concept of operational security appealed to me. Old habits, I suppose. In the army, you learn to cover your tracks, to move without being seen, to gather intelligence without revealing your position. Installing Tor felt like putting on body armor, that same sense of protection, of creating barriers between yourself and potential threats. The dark web wasn't what I'd expected. Less criminal marketplace, more like a parallel internet where people could speak freely about things that wouldn't be tolerated on Facebook or Twitter. Political dissidents, whistleblowers, people living under authoritarian regimes. It felt purposeful, almost noble. The first few weeks I just observed. Reading forums about government surveillance, privacy rights, digital freedom. There was something therapeutic about it. Being part of a community that understood the value of staying hidden, of operating below the radar. These people got it in a way that civilian therapists never could. It was in one of these privacy forums that I first heard about red rooms, not from someone promoting them, but from a discussion about online myths and digital urban legends. Someone had posted a long thread debunking various dark web horror stories, explaining how most of the sensational stuff you read in newspapers was either exaggerated or completely fabricated. Red rooms, according to this poster, were particularly ridiculous. The technical challenges alone made them impractical. Streaming live video over Tor was unreliable, the latency was terrible, and the bandwidth requirements were enormous. More importantly, they argued, the risk to reward ratio made no sense. Why would criminals expose themselves to that level of surveillance and law enforcement attention when there were easier ways to make money? The post was thorough, well-researched, and completely convincing. It also had the unintended effect of making me curious about whether they actually existed. I told myself it was just intellectual curiosity. After years of intelligence work, you develop a natural skepticism about official narratives. When someone tells you something is impossible, your first instinct is to test that assertion. Not because you want to find something horrific, but because you want to understand how the world actually works, rather than how people say it works. The search took weeks. Most of the links I found led to obvious scams, sites demanding payment upfront or requiring personal information that any sensible person would never provide. Others were clearly honey traps, probably run by law enforcement agencies trying to catch people with questionable intentions. But occasionally, buried deep in technical discussions or hidden in the metadata of seemingly unrelated files, I'd find references that seemed more genuine. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I'd been helping out at a veteran support group, not talking, just making tea and setting up chairs, when I overheard a conversation between two ex-Signals operators about online payment systems. They were discussing the profit margins on different digital services, and one of them mentioned that the real money wasn't in legitimate businesses, but in providing services that people couldn't get through normal channels. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask, but something about the way he'd said it stuck with me. The next time I was browsing the dark web, I started looking at it differently. Instead of searching for red rooms directly, I started following the money, payment processors, digital transfer systems, the financial infrastructure that would be needed to support something like live streaming to paying customers. That's how I found the marketplace. It was hidden several layers deep, accessible only through a series of referral links that changed daily. The front page looked like any other dark web market. Drugs, fake documents, stolen credit card details. But there was a section marked Premium Services that required additional verification to access. The verification process was more thorough than anything I'd encountered. Not just prepayment through untraceable methods, but proof of identity that had to be cross-referenced against previous purchases, references from existing members, even a brief interview conducted through encrypted chat to confirm you weren't law enforcement. It took nearly a month to get approved, and by the time I did, I wasn't sure I actually wanted access anymore. But the same compulsion that had carried me through 3 tours in Afghanistan, the need to see a mission through to completion, kept me going. The Premium Services section was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 30 or 40 listings, mostly for things that were disturbing, but not particularly surprising. Custom pornography, identity theft services, professional harassment campaigns, the sort of services that existed in the grey areas between legal and illegal, catering to people with money and flexible morals. The listings that interested me were at the bottom of the page in a subcategory marked Live Entertainment. 3 different providers, each offering real-time streaming services with interactive elements. The descriptions were deliberately vague. Authentic experiences, unscripted content, viewer participation opportunities. But the prices gave them away. These weren't webcam shows or adult entertainment. They were charging thousands of pounds for single sessions. I spent another week researching the providers before making contact with one. Their listing claimed to offer documentary-style content featuring real participants in authentic scenarios. The language was careful, designed to provide plausible deniability while making the actual service clear to interested buyers. The booking process was surprisingly professional. Encrypted email exchanges, detailed technical requirements for viewing, even a customer service representative who walked me through the setup process. They operated like a legitimate business, complete with scheduling systems and technical support. The session was arranged for a Tuesday night at 11:30. I was provided with a unique link and access credentials that would only work during a specific 2-hour window. The technical requirements were extensive. Updated browsers, specific security plugins, a reliable internet connection with minimum bandwidth requirements. When the time came, I almost didn't connect. I sat at my laptop for nearly 20 minutes, cursor hovering over the link, trying to decide if I really wanted to see what I was about to see. In the end, it was the same morbid curiosity that had carried me this far. I needed to know if it was real. The stream loaded slowly, buffering every few seconds as the encrypted video fought its way through Tor's layered network. When it finally stabilized, I was looking at what appeared to be a basement or cellar. Concrete walls, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and a chair positioned in the center of the frame. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just an empty room with occasionally flickering lighting. As the video quality adjusted, I I was beginning to think I'd been scammed when a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. It was a man in his 40s or 50s, wearing coveralls and latex gloves. He moved methodically around the room, checking equipment I couldn't quite see, adjusting the camera angle, preparing for something. His movements were practiced, professional. This wasn't his first time doing whatever he was about to do. A chat window had appeared beside the video player, showing messages from other viewers. There weren't many, maybe 8 or 10 people total, but they were clearly regulars. They talked about previous sessions, compared notes on different providers, discussed technical aspects of the streaming quality like they were reviewing a television program. Then someone else entered the room. She was young, probably early 20s, and clearly confused about where she was or how she'd gotten there. The man in coveralls guided her to the chair with gentle but firm insistence, speaking to her in what appeared to be a calming manner. She kept looking around the room, taking in the concrete walls and bare bulb and camera equipment with growing alarm. The chat exploded with activity. Viewers were making requests, placing bets, discussing what they wanted to see happen next. Payment details were being shared. Transactions were being arranged in real time. I watched in horrified fascination as what I was witnessing transformed from documentary into auction. I should have closed the browser, should have reported what I was seeing to the police, though I had no idea how to explain how I'd found it, or whether they'd even believe me. Instead, I found myself paralyzed by the same terrible fascination that had carried me through firefights in Helmand, that state of hyper-awareness where time slows down and you observe everything with crystalline clarity while being unable to act. The man in coveralls began responding to specific requests from the chat. He would pause, read something on a screen I couldn't see, then nod or shake his head. Sometimes he would hold up different tools for the camera, letting the viewers choose which one he should use. It was interactive in the most disturbing way possible. A live-streamed crime where the audience was complicit in every decision. Then something changed. The chat messages stopped, replaced by a single repeated warning from multiple users. Terminate session, terminate session, terminate session. The man in coveralls looked directly at the camera, his expression shifting from professional calm to genuine alarm. He moved quickly to something off screen, and seconds later the video cut out entirely. I stared at a blank screen, showing only a connection error message. When I tried to reload the page, the link was dead. The entire marketplace had vanished, as if it had never existed at all. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that what I'd witnessed had been staged. Elaborate theatre designed to part fools from their money. The production quality had been too professional, the interactive elements too seamless. Real criminals wouldn't operate with such sophisticated customer service and technical infrastructure. But I kept thinking about those final moments before the feed cut out. The way the man's expression had changed when he'd seen those warning messages. The speed with which everything had shut down. It felt less like a performance ending and more like an emergency evacuation. 3 weeks later, I received a package. It arrived by regular post, addressed to my flat with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, printed on ordinary paper with a home printer. It showed the interior of my living room, taken from the position of my laptop screen. I was visible in the background, sitting at my kitchen table, clearly recognizable despite the low light. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a single line in neat handwriting. "We know what you watched." I called the police immediately, reported the break-in, showed them the photograph, explained about the package. But what could they do? No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, no way to trace where the photograph had come from. The officer who took my statement was polite, but clearly thought I was either paranoid or making it up. I've changed the locks 3 times since then, installed security cameras, motion sensors, even hired a private investigator to check if anyone had been asking questions about me. Nothing. Whoever had been in my flat had left no trace beyond that single photograph. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying awake, listening to the sounds of the building settling around me, I wonder if they ever really left. Because the thing about surveillance is that once you know you're being watched, you never stop feeling those eyes on you. I still get packages occasionally, never more than once a month, always delivered by regular post. Sometimes it's another photograph, my kitchen, my bedroom, the view from my living room window. Once it was a printout of my medical records from the army. Last month it was a copy of my therapy notes from the NHS. Each one carries the same message on the back. We know what you watched. I don't know if it's a threat or just a reminder. I don't know if they want something from me, or if they're simply ensuring I remember what I witnessed. But I've learned that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The worst part isn't the invasion of privacy, or even the constant feeling of being monitored. It's knowing that somewhere out there, that basement with the concrete walls and single bare bulb might still be operating. That other people might be sitting at their computers right now, watching live streams of things that should never happen, placing bets on human suffering like it's a sporting event. And I'm the only one who knows it's real. At least, I hope I'm the only one. I still can't quite believe how quickly things went from normal to absolutely terrifying. 2 months ago, I was just a minicab driver in Newcastle, trying to make ends meet after losing my warehouse job. Now I'm hiding in a service station near Durham, and tomorrow night I'm supposed to help transport someone to their death in a Red Room broadcast that I've been unknowingly facilitating for weeks. I've been driving for Galaxy cars for about 6 months. It's not glamorous work, late nights, drunk passengers, navigating through traffic for what works out to less than minimum wage most shifts. But after the warehouse closed down, it was the only job I could get that didn't require waiting weeks for security clearances or training courses. You just need a clean license, a reasonably decent car, and the ability to deal with difficult people. The job that changed everything started in early October. I got a call from the dispatcher about a regular booking. Someone who needed transport twice a week, always the same route, always paid in cash. The customer was described as a professional gentleman who required discretion and reliability. The pay was better than usual, and regular bookings are gold dust in the minicab business. The passenger was a man in his 40s called Michael Stevens. He was always waiting outside when I arrived, always polite and professional, and never wanted to make small talk during the journey. The route was consistent: pick up from a residential address in Gosforth, drive to an industrial estate on the outskirts of the city, wait for about 2 hours, then drive him back home. Michael explained that he worked in media production and needed transport to a specialized facility where his company created content for online platforms. He said the work required unusual hours and that he preferred having a reliable driver rather than using different taxi services that might not understand his schedule. The industrial estate where I dropped Michael was one of those anonymous business parks filled with warehouses and small manufacturing units. The specific building he used was unmarked, with blackened windows and several high-end cars usually parked outside. During the 2-hour wait, I'd see other people arriving and leaving, all carrying equipment cases or technical gear. After several weeks of this routine, Michael started asking if I'd be interested in additional work. He needed someone to help with equipment transport, moving cameras, lighting gear, and computer systems between different locations. The pay was substantially better than driving, and Michael assured me the work was straightforward manual labor. I agreed to the additional work, partly for the money, and partly because I was curious about what kind of media production required such elaborate security and secrecy. Michael explained that his company created specialized content for niche audiences who paid premium rates for high-quality, authentic material. The equipment transport work involved loading and unloading professional-grade cameras, sophisticated lighting systems, and computer servers that seemed more advanced than anything I'd seen in normal television or film production. Everything was carefully packaged and required precise handling to avoid damage. Michael gradually introduced me to more aspects of his operation. He needed help setting up equipment in different locations, not just the industrial estate, but also residential properties and commercial spaces around Newcastle and the surrounding areas. The setups were always temporary, designed to be assembled quickly and dismantled without leaving traces. The locations varied, but they all shared certain characteristics: soundproofed rooms with controlled access, spaces that could be completely isolated from outside observation, and technical infrastructure that supported high-bandwidth internet connections. Michael explained that this variety was necessary for creating diverse content that would appeal to different audience preferences. As weeks passed, Michael began explaining more about his business model. His company produced what he called authentic interactive content for online platforms that specialized in realistic, unscripted material. Viewers paid substantial amounts for access to live streams that felt genuine rather than obviously staged or performed. The technical requirements for this content were demanding: multiple camera angles, professional lighting that could be adjusted in real time, audio systems that captured every detail, and streaming infrastructure that could handle thousands of simultaneous viewers without interruption. Michael's operation was sophisticated enough to meet these standards consistently. Michael also started discussing the importance of finding suitable performers for his content. He explained that the most valuable material featured people who provided authentic reactions to various situations. Viewers could distinguish between obvious acting and genuine responses. So his company specialized in creating scenarios that produced real emotions and reactions. About a month into the equipment work, Michael asked if I'd be interested in a different type of assignment. He needed someone to help with what he called scenario testing, essentially helping to verify that technical setups would work correctly for live broadcasts. The pay for this work was even better, and Michael assured me it was just technical verification rather than actual content creation. The scenario testing involved me spending time in the prepared spaces, while Michael operated the equipment from control rooms. He would test camera angles, audio levels, lighting configurations, and streaming quality by having me move through different positions and respond to various prompts he provided through the technical systems. Michael explained that this testing was essential because his audience expected flawless technical quality. Any problems with audio, video, or streaming could ruin the viewing experience and damage his company's reputation. The testing sessions helped ensure that everything would work perfectly during actual broadcasts. The testing became increasingly elaborate. Michael would simulate various scenarios, test my responses to different types of stimuli, and document my reactions to unexpected situations. He said this comprehensive testing helped his company understand how their technical setups would perform under the stress of live broadcasting. During these sessions, Michael would give detailed instructions about timing, positioning, and responses to different cues, follow specific movement patterns, react to various sensory inputs, demonstrate how someone might behave in challenging circumstances. He claimed this testing helped optimize the technical systems for capturing authentic human responses. 3 weeks ago, everything became clear in the most horrifying way possible. I was conducting what Michael had described as a final comprehensive test when I noticed that the monitors in the control room were displaying more than just local recording interfaces. Multiple screens showed dark web streaming platforms with view accounts indicating thousands of people watching live feeds. Michael's media production company wasn't creating content for mainstream online platforms. It was broadcasting live torture and murder to paying audiences on the dark web. The spaces I'd been helping to set up were red rooms, and I had been unknowingly preparing them for operation while gradually being recruited as their transport coordinator. The weeks of scenario testing had been training sessions, teaching me the locations and procedures I'd need to know as their logistics coordinator. My equipment transport and setup work had been gradually transformed into preparation for facilitating actual Red Room operations, moving victims and managing the technical infrastructure. Michael dropped all pretense when he realized I understood what was happening. He calmly explained that minicab drivers were ideal logistics coordinators for his operation. They could transport victims without raising suspicion, had legitimate reasons for visiting multiple locations, and could move equipment between sites as part of their normal work routine. The industrial estate facility was just one node in a larger operation that used multiple locations across the Northeast. Michael's company specialized in identifying and recruiting people whose jobs provided cover for the gradual conditioning process required to create authentic dark web content. My scenario testing sessions had been training me for tomorrow night's operation. I'd been learning the procedures for transporting unwilling victims, understanding the technical requirements for live broadcasts, and becoming familiar with the security protocols necessary for avoiding detection during actual Red Room events. I managed to escape while Michael was distracted with technical preparations, but I know his surveillance network extends far beyond the locations I'd visited. They've been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements through the minicab company's GPS systems, and building detailed profiles of my personal life. Since leaving Newcastle, I've been moving between different locations, but they keep finding me. Messages sent to my phone despite changing numbers, people who seem to recognize me at petrol stations and service areas, evidence that my movements are being tracked through methods I don't understand. Yesterday, I received a package at the bed and breakfast where I'd been staying. A package containing a sat-nav device that showed tomorrow night's pickup location and delivery route. Michael's operation had been preparing for months, and they expected me to transport their next victim to the prepared Red Room facility. The package included detailed information about tomorrow's victim, a young woman who had been selected and prepared through their recruitment network. They knew her routines, her vulnerabilities, and exactly how to get her into my car without raising suspicion. My role was to collect her and deliver her to the broadcast location. I could go to the police, but Michael has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in his dark web activities. Galaxy Cars would have records of my regular bookings, my involvement in equipment transport, and my participation in what they would call training sessions that could be presented as voluntary preparation for criminal activity. Security cameras at the various locations would show me helping to set up equipment, following Michael's instructions, and participating in what could be characterized as preparation for facilitating kidnapping and murder. Without context, my actions would appear to show someone knowingly working as a logistics coordinator for dark web red room operations. Michael's operation is too sophisticated, too well established, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The minicab industry provides perfect cover. Drivers regularly visit unfamiliar locations, work irregular hours, and have legitimate reasons for transporting equipment and spending time in industrial areas. Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch what Michael's audience has been anticipating for weeks. They've paid to see a carefully planned abduction and murder, and they expect their logistics coordinator to deliver the victim as promised. My months of unknowing preparation have led to this moment. I'm writing this from a service station toilet because it's one of the few places with constant lighting and regular security patrols. But I know they're still watching somehow. The sat-nav device included details about tomorrow's victim and pickup location, suggesting their operation extends to surveillance and recruitment networks I never suspected. In roughly 20 hours, I'll have to decide whether to collect the victim they've assigned me or refuse to participate and face the consequences. But Michael has demonstrated that his network can track me across multiple counties, and they have evidence that could destroy my life even if I don't complete tomorrow's assignment. The most terrifying realization is that Michael's operation probably uses multiple drivers simultaneously. How many other minicab drivers might be unknowingly transporting victims to Red Room facilities? How many regular bookings might be training operations for logistics coordinators who don't understand what they're really facilitating? The transport industry provides perfect access to isolated workers who visit unfamiliar locations, handle sensitive cargo, and are expected to maintain discretion about their passengers and destinations. It's an ideal setup for exploitation by people who understand how to gradually transform routine work into participation in something much darker. Michael's technical expertise allows him to maintain sophisticated surveillance and streaming operations while using legitimate transport needs as cover. His business credentials provide credibility, his security requirements deflect suspicion, and his resources allow him to maintain operations across multiple locations. Tomorrow's broadcast is being promoted as featuring a carefully orchestrated abduction using their trained logistics network. Michael's audience values the meticulous planning and professional execution that their driver coordination system enables. I never thought driving a minicab could lead to this kind of moral crisis. I thought the biggest risks were difficult passengers or road accidents. I never imagined that regular bookings could lead to becoming complicit in someone else's murder. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so terrifying. I spent months learning to become an accomplice to murder without knowing what I was training for. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled Perfect Delivery. Michael's audience is expecting a flawless abduction executed by their professionally trained logistics coordinator. And an innocent woman is going to die because I helped build the system that will kill her. The driver becomes the deliverer of death to someone who has no idea what's coming. And I still don't know if I'll show up or let them destroy my life for refusing to complete the delivery. I wasn't looking for anything specific that night. I couldn't sleep, and I'd already burned through the usual distractions, Netflix, Reddit, old messages I shouldn't have reread. That kind of night. You're not tired, just restless. Everything's quiet, but your head won't shut up. I ended up back on the dark web. I'd messed around with it before, mostly out of curiosity. Never bought anything, never went deep. But that night, I felt pulled toward it, like I was itching for something I couldn't name. They always say you should stop scrolling when your hands start to shake, or when you feel the temperature change in the room, or when the silence becomes too loud. It's one of those internet urban legends people share to scare each other off the deep end of the web. I used to think that was all drama. Just horror fanfare for people who wanted to feel edgy. Now I think those warnings exist for a reason. It started with insomnia, that kind of mindless, late-night restlessness where nothing feels real and the smallest click can lead to hours vanishing. I was going through a rough patch, jobless, between apartments, staying in my older brother's spare room and trying to keep out of the way. My days had no structure, and my nights were filled with screen glow and silence. I had gone through every surface web rabbit hole I could find, creepy forums, niche subreddits, amateur surveillance camera archives. At some point, I started getting bored with the usual stuff. It didn't hit the same. I wasn't looking for horror exactly. I just wanted to feel something. Anything. That's when I remembered the dark web. I'd heard all the stories, fake red rooms, black market hoaxes, the usual dramatic stuff. But I also knew the tech. I knew how to navigate it safely. Or at least, I thought I did. I spun up Tails OS on an old laptop, routed through Tor, and kept my identity clean. For a while, it was just curiosity. Old message boards, empty markets, strange listings with broken links. It was like walking through an abandoned shopping mall, but with the lingering smell of something rotting just out of sight. But one thread kept coming back. It was buried inside a defunct forum with barely any traffic, mostly dead links and gibberish posts. But one thread, titled simply "Windowless," had recent activity. A few users kept responding to each other in single words, like coded check-ins. I didn't understand what they were saying, but something about how quiet the rest of the forum was made that thread feel alive, like it was pulsing just under the surface. I watched it for days before someone posted something new. They dropped a link, no fanfare, just a bare hyperlink with a timestamp and the words "real feed." It led to a login screen. I didn't have credentials, obviously, but I took a screenshot out of habit. A few minutes later, a second post appeared with a new link. This one had a different domain. I clicked it without really thinking. It brought me to a countdown. 1 minute 44 seconds. There was no text, no branding, just the timer and a black video window below it. I stared at it, trying to guess what it might be. The chat was open, but it was locked. I couldn't post, only watch. The numbers ticked down. I almost closed the tab, but something made me wait. Maybe it was the way the screen made everything around me feel darker. Or maybe I was just curious in a way I didn't want to admit. The hum of the air conditioning sounded distant, like I was sinking below something. When the timer hit 0, the feed activated. The screen lit up with a dim, grainy video of a room. Small, concrete, a single metal chair bolted to the floor, a chain on the back wall. Nothing else. At first it was empty. I thought maybe it was a hoax, another ARG, something theatrical. But then a figure stepped into frame. Not the person I expected. It was a man in dark clothes, face obscured. He looked into the camera briefly, then left the frame. A few seconds later, he returned, dragging someone. The person's face was hidden, but they were conscious, struggling weakly, hands tied. They were shoved into the chair and strapped in. The chat exploded. Lines of text flew by. Most of it was incomprehensible. Users bidding, commenting, laughing. Some posted emojis. Others just spammed numbers. There was a list forming on the right. Usernames next to dollar amounts. And at the top of the list was a name I recognized. Mine. It didn't make sense. I hadn't logged in. I hadn't made an account. But there it was. My username from an old game account I hadn't used in years, spelled exactly the same. And next to it, a bid, £8,300. I felt something drop in my chest. My hands were sweating. I reached for the mouse, but it lagged. The screen flickered. The video kept going. The person in the chair looked up. Even with the resolution as bad as it was, I could see the fear in their face. They were crying, muffled. Their eyes scanned the room like they were looking for a way out, and for some awful reason, I felt like they could see me. Like I wasn't just watching, like I was part of it. The camera zoomed in slightly. More bids came in. More usernames I didn't recognize, but mine stayed near the top. Then the figure came back, holding something. A blunt object. The way he moved was calm, mechanical. And just before the feed cut out, he looked directly at the camera. The screen went black. The chat froze. Then the browser closed itself. I sat there staring at my desktop, heart racing. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't clicked anything except the link. How did it know my name? That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, or what little I could see of it, staring through the screen. Not like he was performing, like he was watching me. The next day, I got an email. No subject line. Just an image. A photo of my house, taken from the street. It wasn't recent. It had to be at least a year old, before I moved. But it was mine. You could see my old car in the driveway, the busted mailbox I never fixed. More messages came after that, each one from a different address. Most just contained links. I didn't click them. One had a video attachment. I deleted it without opening it. Even hovering over it made my skin crawl. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 10 seconds of silence, followed by the sound of something metal scraping across concrete. I left the house that night. I didn't pack a bag. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove. Slept in a motel an hour away. Threw the laptop in a dumpster behind a gas station. Bought a new phone the next morning. But it didn't matter, because the next morning there was a piece of paper tucked under the motel door. Just one sentence. Your bid was accepted. I don't know how they found me. Maybe they never lost me. I moved across the country after that. Changed my name. Got a job under the table. No credit cards. No internet in my name. I even stopped using public Wi-Fi. I did everything you're supposed to do when you want to disappear. And for a while, I thought I'd done it. It worked. For almost a year. Until last week. I found a box outside my door. No postage, no return address. Just sitting there like someone had placed it and walked away. Inside was a single item. A webcam. Old, dusty, with a cracked lens. The kind you'd plug into a desktop tower back in 2005. I hadn't seen one like it in years. Underneath it, there was a folded note. Smile for the feed. I haven't turned on a screen since, and I don't think I ever will again.